Howdy, Vine Trippers. I wanted to take just a moment before the show begins to tell you a little bit about the Texas Wine Lover website and app. It is a definite must-have for anyone wanting to explore the Texas wine industry. Now, they have a website. It's txwinelover.com, but they also have an app that you can actually download to your phone. You can find it on the Apple App Store or on the Google Play Store for Android devices. And it's going to be kind of your one-stop shop for when you go out to visit these great places. So you get to listen to them here on the podcast or watch them on YouTube to learn about these wineries. But when you go to visit, make sure you're checking out that app, because I'm sure you're probably going to want to visit other places in the area as well. And you can do incredible searches. It's the most comprehensive listing of winery information in Texas. And you can look for wineries in your area to go visit multiple places. You can sort those listings by finding out ones that are kid-friendly, maybe some that are pet-friendly. If you want to look for events or things that are going on, if you want to find those that can host RVs, just about any category you can think of, you can actually sort those listings and find wineries around you to go visit. The app is free to use for you and I. So it's a perfect, again, hand-in-hand tool when you're going out to visit wineries. Listen to them on this podcast, watch them on YouTube, and then start making your plans to go visit and use the Texas Wine Lover app when you go. Now, it can also be a great tool. Maybe you're not even looking for a winery. You just happen to be traveling to some place in Texas, and you just might think, I've got a little extra time. I wonder if there are any wineries in the area. You can actually look them up in the Texas Wine Lover app. You can search either by the name of a winery, or it's got a map view. So you can actually pull up a map of the area around you and see locations of wineries near you and go visit them and support the Texas wine industry. So you got to use the Texas Wine Lover app. It goes perfectly with this podcast. So make sure you check it out before you go on your next trip among the vines. Again, it's www.txwinelover.com, or look up the Texas Wine Lover app on your favorite phone app store and make sure you get that downloaded and use it frequently. You will benefit from it and ask for Texas wines. Let's see the Texas wine industry prosper and go visit some of these fun places that I'm bringing to you on the show. Welcome to Texas Under Vine, an exploratory podcast to scout out the best Texas wine country has to offer. I'm your wine guide, Scott, and I'm here to lead you on an auditory expedition to the vineyards and wineries across the great Lone Star State. Each episode will cover a different vineyard, winery, or wine-related business operating in Texas. You'll hear interviews, descriptions, and details about each location that will excite you to visit and experience them for yourself. Ready to plan a wine tour? Use these episodes to choose the most interesting spots for you and your friends to check out. Most of all, enjoy hearing about the rapidly growing wine industry in the state and what makes our wines and wineries the best. Howdy, fellow Vine Trippers. Welcome to episode 56 of the Texas Under Vine podcast. And I'm going to ask you to stick with me today for a little bit longer episode than normal, but I've got a really fun and exciting interview when I went out and traveled to Coordinates Vineyards in the Texas Hill Country on the Wine Road 290 out near High, Texas. And I have a fun interview with the owner, Austin Kerr, and it's very fun and educational. I know it's a little bit longer than my typical episode, so stick with me. I really think you're going to enjoy it today. So let's talk for a second about Coordinates. So the winery itself was started by Austin Kerr and his brother. Now, Austin was actually raised in a medical family out on the West Coast and thought he might pursue medicine for a career. Quickly found out a little while into it that it wasn't really quite his thing. and ended up deciding to travel to Taiwan to teach English there in Taiwan and lived there for several years. During his time in Taiwan, he began getting involved in actually importing South African wine to China and to Taiwan, and really got interested and involved in that. And then received a call after a while from his brother about the idea of starting a winery in Texas. So on a whim, they created a business plan and moved here to the Hill Country and created Coordinates Vineyards. And they opened up their first location actually on Main Street in Fredericksburg. They had a little tasting room there. And now, that was in 2022, and now they've actually opened up recently a new tasting room on the Wine Road, again, near High, Texas. It's a really cool place situated in a historic house built around 1903. Used to be owned by the Dykey family there in the Hill Country area, and has a little bit of historical significance you'll hear more about in the interview. But just as a little sneak peek, Lyndon B. Johnson, the former president, actually grew up just down the road in Johnson City and was friends with the Dykeys, actually played baseball with them there on the lawn at their house. And there's some really fun historical things that go into all of that. Again, I don't want to spoil it all because you'll hear about it in the interview. Now, that tasting room itself there in High was actually built as a Sears Kit home, and again, way back in the early 1900s, and was actually bought to be a bed and breakfast several years ago, and was actually moved back from the road a little bit from where it normally was situated there, closer to the road. And it changed hands a few times as a bed and breakfast until Austin and his brother purchased it recently to end its days as a B&B and to become their new tasting room there in High and the home of Coordinates Vineyards. Now, part of the area out front where they moved the house back a little bit, they planted a small, just a little 1/4-acre vineyard of Tannat, and they're managing that and growing that. It's actually now in its 3rd year of growth, so they experienced their first good harvest on that vineyard, and some of those wines are going to be coming up soon. They're actually in barrel now, and that will be their first kind of estate wine there of Tannat that they've planted in that front vineyard. And Austin, with his background as an educator, really strongly believes in education and finding out wherever the customer is on their wine journey, following along with the Coordinates theme, and educating them. And so when you go to Coordinates Vineyards, you're going to have an experience like no other. It's not just somebody pouring some wine for you. He and his servers really are knowledgeable, and they want to know where you are on your wine journey. What are the things that really meet your palate? Maybe expand that just a little bit and give you a lot of history and stories. You're going to hear a lot of great history and stories in the interview today, and it's just a sampling of the kind of experience you can expect when you go to visit them there at Coordinates Vineyards. Now, the name Coordinates Vineyards actually comes from some interesting travel experiences that Austin has had, and each one of the bottles actually carries the coordinates on it of the vineyard where those particular grapes came from for that wine. And they serve a lot of South African wine based on Austin's experience with importing that, and that's a lot of where his love of wine is. He tells us that it's actually a very old wine region there, going back to the 1600s, and you'll get to hear some of that fun story in the interview. But he loves South African wines and imports those there, and so they have a lot of different South African varieties, and they also have some Texas varieties that they get from the High Plains as well as elsewhere, and soon they're going to have that estate Tannat coming up on their menu as well. So I recently visited that historic house location there in High, Texas, was able to sit down with Austin and hear some of his story, and it's a very fun and educational interview. We talked for a long time, and I tried not to trim too much out of the interview because there's so much good stuff here. I really hope you will enjoy hearing Austin's passion and a lot of great information about South Africa and South African wines, if you're not familiar with that, as well as their location and what they're doing to take you on your journey there, your wine journey, wherever you are, to put on some new milestones in your wine journey as you find the coordinates there at Coordinates Vineyard. So let's go to the interview and hear from him. Well, howdy, Vine Trippers. I'm here with Austin Kerr at Coordinates Vineyards. And it's in this really fun little house on the Wine Road 290 in between Johnson City and Fredericksburg in the little town of High. Great little location, amazing wines and things here. And I look forward to telling you more about the story. So let's talk to Austin and see what he has to say about this cool location. So, Austin, tell me a little bit about yourself. What got you into the wine industry?
Well, that's quite a story. But first of all, thanks, Scott, for having me here today. We're excited to tell our story and be able to share a little bit about what we do here at Coordinates Vineyards. So I'm Austin Kerr, and like yourself, I was an educator for a while. To go back to where my story kind of begins, I have to go back quite a ways. I grew up in Oregon, in Ashland, which is actually the town where Signor makes their wine. So interesting little connection there. But I grew up in a pretty medical family. Like my brother is a partner in the business with me, is a plastic surgeon in Austin. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a chiropractor. My uncle's a dermatologist. So I grew up thinking that I was going to go into the medical industry.
In your blood, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I studied biology and chemistry at the University of Oregon and worked in pharmacies throughout like the whole time that I was going to school, with a real kind of focus on getting into med school, which I actually eventually did.
Oh.
But before I jump on to the next part of the story, there was a moment when I was probably about 19, so maybe like my freshman or sophomore year of university. And I was in Eugene in Oregon, which is like just south of the winelands there. And I, for some reason, got this bug in my brain that I really wanted to go like see what was going on in these wineries. And so one day I called in sick to work. I didn't go to school, and I just went out and shadowed a winemaker. And it was such a cool experience. Like, he showed me all around the lab, and I loved all the chemistry that he was doing, but I was only 19, so he wouldn't let me drink any of the wine. And he tried to hire me for the harvest, but it was paying like $4.25 an hour back then. And I was making so much more in the pharmacy that I never did it. But I always kind of wondered, like, what would my life have been like if I'd gotten into wine like so much earlier?
Planted that seed early on.
Yeah, it was certainly something that, I have been interested in, like intensely interested in, from a pretty young age, which is unusual. But wine tends to be something that people find as a second or third.
Yeah, like me,
career.
yeah.
Really, it is. So it's unusual for someone to go to school, study, viticulture and enology, and graduate at 21 or 22 and go right into the wine industry without really having any experience with it. So it kind of makes sense to me that it would be that way. But my own story just sort of had that brief moment where I was like, let me go check that out. And then, I went back to what was my life. So I went back to school, finished, I did a bunch of study abroads while I was in school. I did a year in Costa Rica. I did 6 months in Ecuador, which sort of set me up for this life of traveling and living abroad that I very much embraced. So there's a lot of, like, what makes coordinates is the experience that both my brother and I have had traveling around the world a lot. But went to school with a medical focus, and then got into medical school in California. And only then did I realize that I really didn't want to do it. So like anatomy was just so viscerally gross for me. My brother cuts people open all day. He absolutely loves it, but it really wasn't. And what I realized, what I was excited about in medicine, was to teach people, to educate people about how to take care of themselves. And when I got into medical school, it was, you have 6 minutes to see this patient, to figure out what's wrong with them, to diagnose them, write them a prescription, and get to the next one without getting sued in the process. And none of that was what I wanted to do. So I left school and kind of bummed around for a little while trying to figure out what I was going to do. But when I left, it was 2008, which was the financial crisis. So nobody was hiring. And I was in this medical world, right? So like, I flew to New Jersey and interviewed with Merck to be a drug rep. I looked at this job with Roche where they were going to run a trial for a new drug. But that job, 5,000 people applied for one job.
Wow.
So the economy just wasn't great.
You
at
sort
that
through
time.
those resumes. Man, I can't
They
get
were
over.
pretty intense. Yeah. But I mean, I was competitive candidate for sure. So not being married and not having any kids and not having any job, I started looking like, okay, where else in the world can I go? I don't have to stay in the United States, right? Like I could go anywhere, except for it's pretty tough to get a visa to like work abroad unless you have a special skill. So like you can't just go to Australia and get a job. You can't even go to Canada and get a job. But if you have something that's valuable for a nation and they don't have that within their own population, then it's pretty easy. So I was like, what's the skill that I have? Well, really the only valuable thing that I had at that point was that I spoke English. Pretty fluently, actually, which was nice.
Amazing. Your native language.
So that is a pretty valuable skill in Asia.
True, yeah.
And at the time that I left, which was like 2009, it was Japan, Korea, and Taiwan were sort of the big places that you could go to work with just speaking English. So as an English teacher, right, ESL language. Japan was pretty expensive. Korea was also pretty expensive, but Taiwan had a pretty good like pay ratio, but the cost of living was cheap. So I figured I could save some money if I went there. So sold my car, flew to Taiwan, basically got a job as soon as I arrived at a pretty big language school. It was full of like 700 students. So we had maybe 15 foreign teachers. When I arrived, I was the only American. There's one British guy, there's one Canadian guy, and there were like 15 South Africans who'd been there for 10 years.
Oh, well.
So they became my immediate friend group, like taught me how to get a cell phone in Chinese and restaurants that I could eat at. And I mean, they were the only people who spoke English. So we hung out all the time for what turned out to be 11 years.
11 years there in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was, strangely enough, my introduction into the wine industry.
Okay. Okay, I got to know more about this because I don't associate Taiwan with wine. So.
And most people don't. There's actually one like fine wine winery in Taiwan. I never got to visit it, but they sell it at the airport. It's called Lodestone, and I like looked around for it everywhere, and it was like I found a Google Map thing that was like an industrial building in the middle of Taiwan, but you couldn't visit it or anything. So I'm guessing they were importing grapes, just making them there. But anyways, yeah. So a lot of people don't think about Taiwan and wine, and for a good reason. But really, my story when I arrived, I'd never been a teacher, so I took a couple years to kind of figure out what I was doing and learn that process first. But after doing that, like one morning I'm sitting there writing my lesson plan for the day, and the teacher next to me is sitting there writing his lesson plan for the day, and a South African guy. And at the top, he'd written himself like a little note. It said, "Give Ross $1 million." And I owed a lot of money. I still owe money for my student loans from med school, right? Like I didn't know it at the time, but the school that I went to in California was the most expensive medical school in the United States, which was ridiculous because it was in a like converted strip mall in Pomona. So they were definitely taking advantage of people. But anyways, I had all this money to pay back, and here this teacher sitting next to me is like, "Give this guy $1 million." Now we're talking about $1 million Taiwan dollars, not US dollars, but it's still a significant.
It's a billion, though. I mean,
like for any teacher, $1 million of anything is a lot, right? So I'm sort of asking him about this, and he's like, "Oh, a lot of us, we studied like at school. We went to the University of Stellenbosch, which is like a university that's a very prominent university in South Africa, just outside of Cape Town.
A major wine country there in South Africa.
Is the center of the wine region. So for us, that university is kind of like UC Davis, which is where a lot of people would study viticulture and enology. But obviously at UC Davis, you can study other things too, right? So like my friends had studied English and PE and went on to be educators, but they went to school with a bunch of people who did viticulture and enology and went into the wine industry. So it turns out they were like buying wine from their school buddies, that had gone into the wine industry and bringing it to Taiwan and selling it at little bottle shops and things, which I was like, oh my God, that's awesome.
Distribution network.
Right? Like I've always had this thing about wine, like this is perfect. I want to get involved. Like, how can I invest?
That seed that you planted years ago is starting to germinate and come forward out of the ground.
Yeah. And so they're like, well, how much money do you have? And I was like, well, I have
$1 million.
$800. like $800. That's all the money I had in the world. And he's like, well, that's not really enough to do anything, but give it to me and I'll account with it with my like investment, and we'll do it that way. And so slowly that, turned, I think my $800 turned into $1,200. And then we were able to kind of roll it over and do it again and do it again. And after a couple of years of that and adding more money into it, I had about $20,000 saved up.
Wow.
Which was a significant amount of money that I could have used to pay back my student loans. That's not exactly what I did with it.
Right.
So this was maybe like 3 years into being in Taiwan, and I had met a girl upon arrival that, pretty close to arrival, that ended up being the girl that I married. So I was married when I was in Taiwan for about 5 years there. But when I met her, she was like working in an office, and she really wanted to be a flight attendant. And so I helped her with her English and, all these other foreign nationals that were there. Like we all wrote letters to help her for her thing. Anyway, she ended up getting hired for Cathay Pacific, which was based in Hong Kong, but a huge international airline. And so one of the people that she like did her training with, they hired, 500 girls from Taiwan at the same time and trained them all in like big groups. So she went through like a 3-month process with like friends that she'd made, during that. And one of the girls ended up retiring at the age of like 27 to marry a guy in Beijing. And I think she met him on one of the flights or something like that. But he was he was the son of a really prominent like construction magnate who'd built the 2008 bird's nest for the Olympics, like the swimming pavilion, like a huge, they just finished a big construction project at the new Beijing airport. But like to be that level in China is very different than it would be, member of the Communist Party, like 20,000 employees, like different, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, she married this guy's son, and he really wanted to prove to his dad that like he didn't have to take handouts, that he had kind of his own business sense and could build his own thing. And so they had this property in the Olympic Village, and he wanted to do like this coffee shop, but as you probably know, China is not exactly like a coffee culture. It's very much more tea than coffee. So people drink coffee, obviously, and there's Starbucks there and stuff now, but it's mostly like early morning. And by noon, like nobody's drinking coffee anymore. So he wanted to take the property and have like a wine bar that would be like a coffee shop in the morning and then flip into a wine bar and then back and forth.
Okay, yeah, repurposed.
Like a pretty good concept to try and make use of the space. And he knew an absolute ton about coffee, but he didn't really know much about wine.
Yeah.
So he started reaching out through his network, like who's in the wine industry, and then through like the girls, right? I guess, it's like this guy's involved. So he comes to me and he says, hey, can you source wine for China? And I was like, yeah, I can do that.
I can do that. I've got some connections.
No idea how to do that. I had my investment was $800. That was it. But I knew it was a great opportunity, right? So,
latch onto that.
I said, absolutely, I can do that. And then I had to go figure out how to do that. So I went to the guys in Taiwan first, and I asked them like, hey, do we expand to Beijing? This is going to be amazing. And they sort of like thought about it for a little while and decided to pass on the opportunity, which floored me. I couldn't believe it. But it left me with kind of the only option was to take out the investment money that I had with them, my 20 grand, and to fly to South Africa to figure out like who I was going to get to supply that wine for.
Interesting.
Which was a step that I don't think most people would have taken.
Yeah.
It was a risk, and it was a lot of work, and at first it was a lot of rejection and a lot of no's, and it was a lot of puzzles. And I find that being an entrepreneur is kind of like that like whenever you don't know how to do something, it's just a puzzle. And once you know the steps to solve the puzzle, then the next time you encounter it, it's much easier, right? The problem with being an entrepreneur versus being somebody that goes to work and does a job every day is that the puzzles are always changing.
Yeah.
So you have to really enjoy solving puzzles.
And sometimes you unlock one puzzle only to find out it's part of a bigger puzzle.
Oh, yeah. It opens a rabbit hole of other puzzles. So it's a battle of energy and resources to apply to like the most immediate puzzle that needs to be solved. And sometimes it's hard to know which one that is. But anyways, we ended up I ended up solving that puzzle and finding the right wine to send to China. And then I spent about 7 years doing direct shipments from South Africa into Beijing. And it was going great. I mean, it's hard to understand what 1.4 billion people looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff would just disappear. It would just disappear. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic hit. And by March of 2020, everything was gone. Like the whole business that I built, everything, the ports were all locked down, nothing in, nothing out. Lockdowns in China were intense. There's nobody drinking wine at home there. If they could go to the supermarket once a week, maybe. So it was a different world. So I went back to teaching for a little while, thinking, wow, that was the craziest wild ride I've ever been on.
That was fun, but
you know, throughout the pandemic, one of the things that you think about is family and, you know, and I'd been away for 11 years. So I was talking to my brother actually for his birthday. He was at Signor, which is just down the street here. And, you know, it was just like, hey, happy birthday. He's like, I'm at Signor. I'm trying to get a bottle of wine and they're out of white wine. I can't believe they're out of white wine. And it was like June, you know, of like 2020 or 2021. I think it was June of 2020. Might have been 21. Anyways, you know, it sounded to me like he'd been drinking. I was like, okay.
Figures out why
Did I have a birthday? He's like, no, wait. We gotta open a winery in Texas. And I was like, what? Like, he's like, you have amazing wine. Your wine is so good. There's nothing like that here. Like, why don't we bring that wine to Texas? And I was like, okay, like, I'll talk to you later, man. You know, he's just,
you were drinking.
he says, just put a business plan together and then like hang that.
Or
right?
that easy.
Just do this. I've never done a business plan. I have no idea what's involved with that. Yeah. So that was the first puzzle, was to figure out how to write a business plan. And, you know, it was surprising. We looked at kind of the numbers. We looked at the industry. We looked at what was around. We looked at the model from some of these other places that are doing very similar, if not exactly the same thing. And I thought, you know, why not us? Like, why not, you know? And so,
That's a true entrepreneur heart right there.
yeah, I guess so. But it just felt like something that I could do.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of conversations had to happen after that. I had a whole life in Taiwan, a career. I'd built an entire science program for the school that I was teaching at that I had to have somebody come and take over, sell my car, talk to my wife about moving from Taiwan to America, which she agreed to do. And she came with me to Texas to start the business. She lasted about 2.5 months. So she's back in Taiwan. We just finished our divorce, actually. And that, you know, I think more than anything was kind of the hidden cost that I didn't know was going to come with it. But I think looking back on it, like, would I have changed it? Would I have not done it? And I think that this is really what I'm meant to do. And I don't think it was what she was meant to do. So no hard feelings. You know, it's a difficult transition from Taiwan to Texas. So, it wasn't the right place for her, but I think it is the right place for me. So, yeah, we're still friendly now. It's good.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a little bit about kind of my story and how I got started in the wine industry.
It's really cool.
And it, you know, gives you kind of a preview of how we got to South Africa and why we have South African wine, which I've been working with for about 10 years now, even though I myself am not South African.
Yeah.
But to me, when I look at the world of wine, and both my brother and I have traveled to every major wine region and most other regions in the world. When I look at South Africa, the things that stands out to me is the history. So they've been doing wine for 365 years. So they're the oldest place outside of Europe to make wine, or the oldest New World wine country by like a lot. So the history, the tradition, the story of wine in South Africa has always fascinated me. But then they've had such a difficult time, particularly with their economy, and not just with apartheid, but the pandemic and everything else. So they have this amazing, like truly amazingly beautiful geography to be able to grow wine. Like, they're just lucky in the Mediterranean climate that exists there, and they can grow a lot of different things. They have the traditions, the experience, and the ability to produce these beautifully handcrafted wines. And their economy is still tough, like really tough. So you get amazing quality at incredible value.
Wow.
And I think it's the best quality to price ratio of anywhere in the world. So I've really been looking for somewhere else. I think Spain is getting real close to nipping on their heels. So I'm really interested in going to Spain. But that's one of the things that Malin, my brother, and I have really focused on with Coordinates, with the winery, is that we want to bring and produce wine of exceptional quality at a great value. Like expensive wine or wine that is expensive can be great, but you can have amazing, great wine that doesn't have to be terribly expensive as well.
Yeah.
So
finding that high quality at the low value.
That's
high value, but the low cost.
Yeah, so. I mean, the personal history, the experience of being there, of course, but I really do feel like South African wine is some of the best value of anywhere in the world.
Wow.
Speaking of which, should we try some?
Yes, let's do. I would love to.
So
see what
I
we
pulled out a couple of bottles here, but
Cool.
This one is open and one of our most popular wines. So this is our Sparkling Brut, which is a sparkling Sauvignon Blanc coming out of Robertson in South Africa. So Robertson is kind of a more mountainous area within the country. So this is coming from a slightly higher elevation or colder vineyard site. And typically colder weather in wine is going to help preserve the acidity behind it, which is really important for sparkling wine in particular. So this is a sparkling Sauvignon Blanc, and you don't see that grape as a sparkling wine.
Not as often.
Pretty much like ever, really. A lot of that has to do with France, right? So they have particular rules within Champagne on what grapes they're allowed to use to make sparkling wine. If you use anything else, you can't call it Champagne. South Africa has some rules and regulations. They don't make Champagne, but they make MCC, which is Méthode Cap Classique, which is their style of Champagne. And there's particular rules and regulations around that. Yeah, like how long does it need to be on the lees in the bottle and all sorts of things. But they also have the ability to experiment a bit more. So this is a forced carbonation. It's Sauvignon Blanc, which is quite unique. And when you smell it, I mean, you get those Sauvignon Blanc characteristics. It's so clearly Sauvignon Blanc, which is lovely. And then the bubbles just make it so refreshing and bright. So cheers. Yeah, one of our most popular wines.
Ooh, and you get all that flavor there from the Sauvignon Blanc too.
Mm-hmm. We're so lucky to have partners in South Africa that are making wines that are this beautiful. Wow.
Well, tell me a little bit about the genesis of Coordinates Vineyard. So a little bit about your background and history. So you put your business plan together and you decided to make an investment. What did that look like? How did that all transpire?
Yeah. So, gosh, how do we get started? Well, we started with the business plan, and then really the first piece of that, and a lot of that has to do with how things are permitted in Texas, is that we had to find a location. So in Texas, in order to get a winery permit, you have to have a location first, and then you permit the location. So the owners don't own the permit, the address owns it, right? So we had to look first for a place, and we looked for a while for something just like this, sort of a farmhouse, a place on 290, something that had vines perhaps already.
Something you could reappropriate maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we always had kind of a bent for historical properties and things like that. But at that time in 21, when we started looking, property values were crazy. Particularly in Fredericksburg. Like that was the height of people buying to turn into Airbnbs because they were still at home. They weren't back working yet. Everybody was staying in Airbnbs.
Everybody's doing those passive income opportunities.
Oh, yeah, right. And there were some great opportunities there for a minute, right? But we got really lucky, actually. So we found a building on Main Street in Fredericksburg. It had been empty for 3 years, so there wasn't anybody in there at all. Like the first thing I had to do when we got into the space was mop like 6 times. So it'd been empty, and it was kind of on the further end of town. So it's just before the Nimitz, between Elk and Washington Street. And it's a beautiful building. It's all stone. It was the first blacksmith shop in the city of Fredericksburg, in the town of Fredericksburg. So it was built in 1879. but it's tiny. It's like 860 square feet.
Okay. But lots of historical
But lots
significance
of
there.
historical significance, beautiful pictures of like the owners and a ledger from the blacksmith shop in there. So it's really a special building. Once we found that space and were able to lease it, then we had to go through all the permitting process and everything that would allow us to even begin to start doing wine. So that took a little while, maybe about 6 months or so, and then we opened our Main Street location on 2/2/22. So
Okay.
just for fun, right?
Yeah.
So we worked there, or I opened that place, worked there for about 2.5 years, and then we were trying to renew the lease for our Main Street location, and the owner was thinking about selling the property. So he was kind of being hesitant to renew the lease with us. And after doing this for a couple of years, we realized how important it is to kind of have a forever home.
Yeah.
You can't be in this kind of a business and have to move around. There's really too much involved. And particularly once you get grapes, like you can't be moving grapes, right? So we started kind of just looking again, just to see what was out there, and came across this property, and it was really everything that we'd been looking for from the beginning. So it's not a large property, which is nice. It's only about 2.4 acres. It has the farmhouse. So this house is a Sears Kit house that was, we think it was built in 1903. Was the home of the Dyke or the Dykey family that lived here. They were kind of famous in the 1920s for living here. And we can go into their story a little bit more, but just about the property, it's got the vineyard in front, which is a pretty small but manageable vineyard for basically an owner-operator like myself. I have to take care of everything on my own. And it's a 1/4 acre, and let me tell you, that almost killed me this year.
That's what I've heard.
It is so much work to be out there. So we have the vines, we have the house, we have the beautiful oak trees around that provide shade in the summer. And I mean, it's just a fantastic property with these porches up and down. So we have a lot more space here, which was something that we really needed. We can do about maybe 40 to 45 people on the covered porches, about 65 inside, and probably another 80 on the picnic tables outside. So we have the ability to do a lot more people here, right at the time where wine seems to be kind of slowing down and collapsing worldwide, which is interesting as well. And one of the shifts that I think is happening is, well, I think that there's a really important question right now that younger generation is battling with. And that question is like, why should we drink wine? And I don't think as an industry that we're doing a very good job of explaining that. It's a hard thing to explain to somebody. Why should you drink wine? I mean, you can talk about the history and how it's been thousands of years of us, cultivating, making wine, but does that mean that they should drink it now? Or we can talk about the flavors and the intensity and, the things that we get, but I don't know that that's something that they can't get from a Truly or from a seltzer or, something else that they're having. So for me, when I think about like, why wine? Well, wine comes with a story. It comes with more than what you get from a soda or something that comes out of a can. There's real people behind it. There's real work. There's labor. There's sweat and tears on a much more individual and personalized way than there is with anything that's being mass produced, like, beer or something that's coming out of a can. And maybe breweries, like small distilleries and stuff, they're going through
craft brews and things like that.
Right, yeah. Craft, right? That's exactly what it is. It's craft.
Yeah.
Like, there is craft in wine. And there's craft in cocktails in some respects as well, but that's different, right? Like, that craft is happening over 15 minutes as they're making a beautiful, elaborate drink that they light on fire for you. But okay, wine is a craft that takes generations.
Yeah.
And I think there's value in that. but I also think that it's really difficult to understand from the outside. And so when people come into Coordinates, one of the things that I'm always trying to do, and you mentioned this sort of wine journey, right? And I think that people that are in the industry that have experience with wine, we understand that there is a journey and that we're on it. And even if we haven't finished it, we can kind of see like the tracks, right? Where it's going. The problem is if you're not even at the station, how do you have any idea what that journey looks like, you know? And so I personally feel, even if you've never had a glass of wine, that you're on that journey. You're just at the very beginning of it.
Yeah.
So as folks come in, what I want to do is I want to quickly try and figure out where they are on that journey, and then give them a piece of information or a few pieces of information that's going to make the experience, that's going to make the journey more enjoyable for them along the way. So how do I give them something of value in education, right? It's not about the value in the wine necessarily. It's about that educational piece that the next time you go wine tasting, it's going to be even more fun. It's going to be even better. You're going to enjoy it even more. And it's just about helping people along that journey.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is the most beneficial for people's health around wine is that wine is very rarely a drink that you have by yourself.
Ooh.
Wine is about bringing people together.
Absolutely.
And the entire reason why wine comes in a 750 milliliter bottle is because it is something that can be easily split with two people over dinner.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about the benefits from what's in the wine, but the social benefits of bringing people together. And one of the reasons that I ended up coming back to Texas is my mom's getting older, my family's getting older. When we look at older folks, one of the most important things for keeping them out of the hospital and keeping them healthy for a long period of time is companionship. So I think there is a piece of the pandemic that changed the way that we interact with people and the connection that we used to have and the camaraderie that we used to share. That changed a lot. And I see that the people that were most affected by that were the teenagers, right? As an educator, you saw that too. Like to be home and isolated from your friends at a very impressionable time. So I'm hoping that when those kids become 22, 23, 24, that wine becomes a mechanism for them to get together. Because what we're finding is that these younger kids, they're drinking Trulies and they're drinking things like that too. They're drinking less wine necessarily, but it's not that they're not drinking at all. It's not that they're not spending money on wine. They're just drinking less alcohol overall. But if 4 people get together and split one bottle of good wine and have an amazing conversation as the social lubricant or as something to discuss intellectually.
Breaking bread together.
Yeah, but also the notes of the wine and the region that it comes from. And there's more in wine to talk about, to experience, to relate with, to have an emotional connection to share than there ever is going to be with, a seltzer or, even a lot of like mass produced things. So I think that wine has a place in society, not necessarily because of the health and the benefits that we're thinking of as far as like this is medicine, but as far as the social fabric that helps to hold us together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of swing back towards. So you got your you got this setup now here on 290. Tell me a little bit about this location, some of the history of it, and you mentioned it was a Sears Roebuck Kit house, which I mean, I'm not a DIYer. I wish I was. My brothers are. I'm not. And so just looking at this amazing place and thinking, even from a kit, I don't think I could build something like this. But it's so beautiful. So tell me a little bit about it.
It's an amazing property. So I found a map from like 1890 that had Daiki, the family that lived here, and they had about 500 acres as like a homestead out here. So if you've ever been to Winemaker, which is just through the trees over there, they started in a Daiki family farmhouse as well. So that would have been part of the property. High Meadow across the street would have been part of that as well. And of course, over the generations, it's been broken up into smaller and smaller lots. But this piece here would have been kind of like the main family homestead.
Okay.
So in 1924, the Dike family, they had 11 kids that all lived in this house. And the crazy thing is the house was actually located a lot closer to the road. So about 8 years ago, the first owner that turned it into an Airbnb moved the entire house back and renovated it. Yeah, it's actually Deanna. She runs Longhorns.
I know Deanna.
She's amazing. So she did all the hard work. She put in the commercial well, the metal roof, the electrical and the plumbing was all updated. They added everything behind that wall was an addition. So you can see the roof line is different on that side. But beautiful home. It's just hard to imagine that, without the 5 bathrooms that they put in. To imagine in 1924, I mean, no electricity. That was before LBJ brought the Pedernales Electric Company out here. Probably no running water, though we did find the old well when we built the parking lot. So outhouses and all those things. But the family was quite lucky because if you had 500 acres to take care of, then you needed a lot of labor to do that. And even today, like nobody lives in High. This is an unincorporated town. There's a post office and 3 wineries. That's kind of it. And the pipe store. But so you had to have a lot of kids, like a boatload of kids. So they did. They had 11 kids. And they were pretty lucky because of those 11 kids, 9 of them were boys.
Okay.
And if you have 9 boys in your family, that is enough to start your own baseball team. Right. So they did, the Dike brother baseball team.
Really?
And it became like national news. Like they, wrote about it. It was quite unique. So every jersey says the same. It says Dike with a different number. And then they found another all brothers baseball team in Chicago. So of course
you got to have the rivalry game.
Got to have the rivalry game, of course, right? Now this was like literally there were like news reporters that like followed them on the journey and like wrote a book about it. And I still to this day, I don't know who won the game because like in all the interviews, the only thing that they talk about is like it was the first time they'd ever been in an automobile because they drove them from here to Kansas, which is in the middle, to play against each other. Yeah. And they drove them there in 2 Model Ts, which took them a week to drive to Kansas. I mean, I just imagine like blown tires and sleeping on the side of the road. And
Dad, are we there yet?
Fires and cans of beans and, all the things. Yeah. I mean, it was probably even before, are we there yet? It's like, what are we doing? What is
there
this?
a Buc-ee's on the way?
Why is this horse making noise? So really kind of interesting that there's that historical piece to the home. And the cool part about it is, right, the way the birth order of the family is like boy, 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 girl, girl, boy. So like the youngest brother was too young to play on the baseball team for a while. And so they had the neighbor boy help him out.
Okay.
And that would have been LBJ.
Oh, really?
So he was from Johnson City, which is not far from here, and knew the brothers and played together on the team until the youngest brother was old enough to play with him. So not only is he like...
He was a pinch hitter.
Exactly, right? And like he's been in, on, under, around the house where the vineyard is right out the window here. That's probably where they would have been playing baseball most of the time. So it's just incredible that, to have this area be so associated with LBJ, but to have that kind of clear connection. He mailed his first letter at the High Post Office across the street and then named the Postmaster General when he was the president there.
Oh.
So he's, a very, very important person for the area. And I just love that, like, this house has that specific connection to him.
So to all my history buff listeners out there, use the Google or whatever you need to do to research. We want to find out who won that game there in Kansas City between the Dike brothers baseball team and the team from Chicago.
So I sort of have a feeling that, like, the Dike brothers probably didn't win.
That's why it's kind of pushed under the rug. We don't talk about the score.
I think that's why I don't know. It's also why I haven't researched shit.
Maybe if you go to Chicago, you'll find it there because they're broadcast.
Yeah, history is written by the winner.
Exactly.
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool. So you've got a lot of LBJ historical.
Actually, all of the things, everything in here except for my guitar, was all in here when we bought the property. So it was an Airbnb. Deanna had started it and then she sold it to someone else who, I think, maybe 4 different people tried to make it work as an Airbnb before we got it. But by the time we did, when we bought the place, we bought it with everything in it. So all of these LBJ pictures were actually under this chair. And, very early days of getting in here, it was like, I found, 50 sets of sheets that I don't need and 1,000 towels and, Airbnb stuff. But under this chair, there was an ice bucket. And I was like, well, that's something I can use, right? Like, I need an ice bucket. And I pulled it out and it was full of like 50 photographs, like 8x10s of LBJ, which I was kind of surprised about. And then somebody came through and told me that he like really loved to give people like 8x10s of himself. And he would like have a guy follow him around and be like, hello. And then they just hand you an 8x10.
I'm the photo guy that just hands out the pictures.
So it's nice to have that historical property, that connection to the area. Of course, we have our own vineyard outside now. So this is all Tannat that we're growing now. It was the 3rd year for the vineyard. So we harvested for the first time this year in August. Got just under a ton, so just over 2,000 pounds.
Not bad for a 3rd year.
Yeah, and it's small, right? So we're only a 1/4 acre. So that was more than I was expecting, quite a bit more. Which will be enough for about 500 bottles sometime.
Limited release estate wine.
Yeah, 14 months or so to kind of get us all in barrel and Stonewall right now. But super excited about it. Tannat is such a great and vigorous variety for the area. So it's fun. It's challenging to have your own grapes in the ground. It is a tremendous amount of work. If there's anybody out there thinking about starting a vineyard, don't. No, seriously though, worldwide, we're at huge oversupply. There's all sorts of growers, even in Texas, dropping fruit on the ground.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that this year.
It's been a really weird time to be in wine, which kind of loops us back to one of the things that we were talking about. So I think as I look at kind of the state of the industry and most difficult time in wine since 1967, sales of literally every kind of wine falling off a cliff. So why buy wine? Why purchase wine? Why are these young people doing that? Well, I think it's about the stories, the connection, the uniqueness, the value that comes with wine that doesn't come with other beverages. And it's about that experience that you have when you come to a vineyard. So if you just want to drink wine or alcohol, go to the grocery store. It's so much cheaper. Like it is. They have way more options than I'll ever be able to provide you.
Right.
But when you come here,
yeah,
it's an experience.
Yeah.
We talk, we tell stories, we share, we learn. It's more than you would ever get from the grocery store. I literally had a guy in here yesterday that was talking about the wine museum in Bordeaux because I just visited Bordeaux. He'd been there like in April or something like that. And as he was leaving, I'm telling my stories throughout the tasting and stuff. He goes, I learned more in the past hour and a half than I did at the wine museum in Bordeaux. And I was like, wow, would you put that in a review?
Exactly, right?
And it's really just about stories. As an educator, people learn through stories. We always have. And so I use stories to kind of explain the wine and the history and what's going on in a way that makes it relatable and emotional. And if you can do that, right? Like if you can tell a story about the wine while someone is experiencing the wine, then literally their experience of the wine is better than if it wasn't, right? Like if I tell you the wine has got strawberries, what do you taste? Strawberries, whether they're there or not, right? But I can like incept your mind into having a great experience with the wine just by providing a great environment for you to be experiencing the wine in.
And I know I've talked to other people as well. I've experienced this where when you are with people, especially like at a tasting room or something like that, and you're tasting wine, it tastes, this is so great, like this and this and this. But then you take the bottle home and you're by yourself and you taste it, it doesn't quite taste the same. There's something about that, experiencing it with other people and things that I think really sets wine apart and makes it really, I don't know, it really enhances the flavor, the mystery, the experience of the whole thing.
So that's actually one of the things that the guy who was here was talking about. He's like, why do I buy wine? I go and I experience it somewhere and then I get home and I try it and I don't like it. And it's interesting because, like I said, there's so many things about the environment that you're in that physically change the way that the wine feels to you. I mean, if you're you're tired, if you're angry, if you're with somebody that's pissing you off, if you got, smells or stress or all of those things will actually take your focus of what you're experiencing in the wine and change it, right?
Yeah.
So wineries are hopefully designed to be the best possible experience of that wine, right? It's the best people with the most knowledge and the best environment with the soft music and the beautiful grapes to look at and the connection to the place, the terroir, and all of it is designed to be the best experience that you can. And ideally, for me, this is what I focus on, is like when you go home and you pop that bottle again, smell is just so intimately connected with memory, right? Like our olfactory bulb is located right next to our hippocampus, which is a memory center in the brain. And so when you smell particular things, it will bring, just right there, memories. For me, like the one that always gets me is every time that I smell like mothballs, it takes me back to my aunt's attic in Portland. Like I'm visually there, like I can feel it, And if you do like a good enough job of building that emotional and memory connection together, then when you go home and you pop that bottle and you smell that wine, it should bring you back to the experience that you had the first time, where you're experiencing the same emotions and joys and the flavors and things. So while yes, it can be the other way, where like, oh, this tastes worse at home than, why doesn't it taste as good as when I'm there? If it can also be like, oh my God, this brings me right back to where I was when I had it that very first time, and I remember the stories and I remember the experience of doing it. And so it can work both ways, right? Yeah, it can happen in both ways.
Interesting. We talk circles back because we were talking earlier about the craft of wine, but I think we were talking about the craft of wine and the craft of making the wine.
Sure, yeah.
But there's a whole craft into serving the wine, the experience that you craft here around the tasting of the wine and the sharing of that with the guests to really make that experience something that connects.
And I think the people that do it the best, right? They're doing both.
Yeah.
They're doing both. Because when I talk to people that come through the tasting room, particularly like somebody that might be interested in joining a wine club or something like that, there's really three things that everybody's looking for.
Okay.
One, the wine has got to be good. Not just like the quality of it, but I personally have to enjoy it. So if I like the wine, and then two is the place. It's ideally going to be beautiful, but at the very least, it has to be clean, right? Because if you feel like you're in a dirty place, then what's the wine?
Yeah,
like?
you're going to associate negatively.
Mm-hmm. So ideally, you're in a place with good wine, a beautiful environment, and then the third one is the people. You have to have a good, friendly experience, right? Because if you walk into somewhere and somebody treats you poorly, or they don't respect you or in a way, or even they make you feel bad because you don't know about wine or whatever it is, all of that is going to affect how the wine physically tastes.
Wow.
So it's all got to play together. And if you can get those three, right, like the wine, the place, and the people, then that is a place that I want to join the club.
Yeah.
Like that's a place where I want to come back to. I want to experience it. And that's really, we spend a lot of time on trying to make sure that we have all three of those things
in place.
And it's tough. And the people is the hardest part about it.
Yeah.
I feel like we have great staff, amazing staff right now, but it's so hard to transfer 10 years of wine knowledge to somebody else. So, we do our best to make sure that everybody has a great experience. And sometimes that means talking about the wine and the science and the geeky stuff. And sometimes that means talking about your life and your experience and all the things. So
relating out.
Yeah, it's just about providing the best experience that we can, because that's the only difference, right? Coming to a vineyard, you have an experience. Going to the grocery store,
yeah,
you don't.
You have a bottle.
Yeah,
Interesting.
You don't understand what's in the bottle.
Well, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but just kind of going a little further. Tell me about the name, Coordinates Vineyards.
Yeah, so unsurprisingly,
we talked about your wanderlust earlier.
There's a story about that. It's a story that I get asked about a lot, and I think it's kind of an unusual name in a lot of ways. We get like a lot of pilots, we get a lot of military, we get people that would use GPS coordinates kind of in a regular everyday life. They kind of pick that out. But really, like, the name comes from that very first trip that I did to South Africa. So I had taken my money out of that investment, and I cold called and emailed and tried to find a bunch of people to help me like source wine in South Africa. My wife at the time had a flight to South Africa in like 2 weeks, so I was really rushing to try and get something together. And I found a guy that was willing to work with me that he's like, okay, I'll pick you up at the airport and take you around to a couple places that I think might work. And so I land at the Cape Town airport, and this guy shows up in a 3-piece suit expecting this Chinese businessman, and then this guy
There you
walks
go.
out. He was like, "You good? Yeah, okay, sure, let's go," right? And so we spent, a good portion of my like 24 hours to make this deal work, going to huge, amazing, beautiful vineyards in Stellenbosch and in South Africa, right around Cape Town. But they were enormous. They were already in China. They were already in America. And I had $20,000, like exactly. If anybody had $25,000, they were going to outbid me on price, and, I wouldn't be able to compete. And so I told him this, sort of halfway through the day, and he's like, well, I wish we would have talked about that ahead of time. We could have saved this. But he said, I think I have a place, a friend of mine. He's a 5th-generation winemaker, has been making wine from the grapes on his family farm for 150 years.
Wow.
I was like, try and find that in Texas, right? But it does not exist. And I was like, that sounds amazing. Like, take me to his winery. Oh, he doesn't have a winery. It's just his house. Like, he just sells yes.
Out of his living room.
Take me there, right? That's exactly what I'm looking for. So it turns out that his place was in Parle, which is the next valley over from Stellenbosch. So everybody knows Stellenbosch, but Parle is kind of if Stellenbosch is their Napa, Parle is their Sonoma. Okay, so also a very important wine region. And to get there, you have to drive like over the mountain range into the next area. So I was there in August, which is actually their winter. So it was like slightly raining. I saw the most beautiful waterfall I've ever seen in my life, like a river just fall off a cliff. And the name Parle means pearl in Afrikaans. And it's named after this like giant boulder that's like stuck onto the side of a mountain. I mean, it's been there forever, right? But it looks like somebody just like stuck it onto the side of the mountain, and it's covered with like bird shit. Sorry if this is a
you're
kids
good.
program. Right? So when it rains, it kind of like shimmers like a mother of pearl. And so it's named Pearl after this like mountain. Okay. But we go over like the wine, the region into the winelands, and it's more of a like rural part of South Africa. And so there aren't always like stop signs or street names, a lot of dirt roads. Like, it's kind of hard to know where you are, right? And so we're driving down this road, and we think we need to get to a road that's parallel to that, but there's like a vineyard in the middle of it. And so we're driving down, it's like pretty far, and there's no way to get across. And then we see that there's like this tractor road like through the thing, and we're like, oh, okay, we just take that, we'll get to the other side and we'll be fine. So we're driving in his like 94 Civic, right? And it's amazing that he had a car, because again, South Africa is economically challenged, so he's driving in his Civic, and we get onto the traffic road, the tractor path, and we're kind of going through the grapes, and then the path just stops. It doesn't like connect to the other side. Well, it's kind of now we got to back all the way up back to the road, or we can try and like turn around.
Yeah, right. 80-point turn.
Yeah, well, literally. So as we start doing that, like he backs up to kind of turn around, and as soon as we get off like the compacted dirt where the tractor was, it was all alluvial clay for the grapes. So just immediately like stuck in the mud, like really stuck in the mud. So I'm young, and I'm on a time crunch, like, okay, I'll push, you steer, like, let's go, So I pop out, and I'm on the back, pushing like as hard as I can, and the tires are just spinning, right? And so I'm speckled with mud from like the nipples down. Like, it was because my face is protected. This nice Civic was low, right? And he's pushing as hard as he can and trying to steer, and like literally explodes his foot like out of his shoe, like his dress shoe, into the mud. And it's like, oh my God, like this is so embarrassing. This is not what I want. So everybody's like back in the car. It's raining, and he's like calling the winemaker, and he's like, listen, man, you gotta come save me. This is not going well. Like, this is not how we wanted the day to go. We've got time. Like, this is turning to me. He's like, let me take you back to the airport. I'm so sorry. Like, we can try again. And I'm like, there is no try again another time. This is
I'm here.
This is it, right? How do we get to this guy's house? And literally, like, there are no numbers for this guy's house. Like, I've tried to send him thank you gifts, and if I try to mail it from the US, like, they won't accept it. But if I do something within South Africa, it's like they know that the postman, like, knows where these people live. And so, like, we can't navigate there. And then finally, Robert, the winemaker, is like, well, I just had a survey done. Let me see if this works. And he gave us the coordinates to his house. And this was in like 2014. So I had no idea that you could actually like navigate by that. Like you can put it into Google Maps and stuff. But I'd just gotten an iPhone. And
Sure.
like it was early days for that stuff.
Yeah.
And so we put it in, and like sure enough, the house was 5 minutes from where we were, and it was winter time. So we broke off some of the branches to put under the tires. It got us out of the mud. And we arrived at this guy's house, and he duct taped Anton's shoe back together so that he could walk in. And I sat down at his living room table, and he served to me the most amazing Pinotage that I've ever had in my life. And that was the first wine that I ever sourced for China. So like literally none of it would have ever happened without the coordinates.
Wow, you never found it.
No. So now we put coordinates on everything to kind of show people where we are. So like this bottle is our Chenin Blanc, which is one that South Africa is quite famous for, their Chenin. So this one comes from Robertson, and then you can like literally look up where the coordinates are. We didn't intentionally plan this, but as you know, most wine in Texas comes from the high plains.
Yeah.
And so when I look at those like coordinates for the vineyards up there, they're mostly at about 33 degrees north.
Okay.
And when you look at South Africa, you can see that they're actually at
33 south.
33 degrees south. So we didn't plan it. It just happens to be the opposite side of the world, which makes it really difficult sometimes to source and get wine to Texas, but it is beautiful.
So you put the different coordinates on each bottle based on the location of where that fruit comes from.
Exactly. So you can always look up and see where it is.
I like that. That's really cool. Interesting. So that became your name.
Coordinates. Yep.
Nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these wines. I mean, that sparkling was amazing. I really enjoyed it. So all of the wines that you have, are you solely South African, or are you bringing other things in?
I mean, obviously we have our own vineyard, so we do South Africa and Texas. We'll work with some different partners in the high plains and the hill country, always looking for great Texas wine. But as you know, Texas is not producing a lot of wine, so it can be difficult to find, quality grapes and quality wines and things available to offer them. So whenever and wherever we can find those, we're always looking for new partners to work with. So if there's anybody out there listening to the podcast, please reach out to us if you think you can help. But we do mostly South African with like the Texas here and there as soon as we can get. We're working on building that out. And then would like to bring in, Spain and Oregon and California as well. What the idea behind Coordinates is that we can choose wines that represent those coordinates, right?
Yeah.
Like those regions.
Amazing wine regions.
Yeah. So I want to have, an amazing example of a Chenin Blanc from South Africa. I want an amazing Rioja from Spain. I want a beautiful Cabernet from Napa. It's challenging and very time consuming to get all of those things in place. And actually the rules around alcohol in Texas are quite difficult. So it's very hard for us to bring on, harder than we expected to bring on new suppliers. But South Africa being where my personal history with wine started will always be kind of the foundation for it. And then Texas, of course, being here, we want to represent the region. We want to have our own grapes in the ground. And I think there are some amazingly beautiful things happening in Texas. We just had James Suckling come through and give some incredible awards to some of our neighbors around here. So,
glowing reviews.
Yeah, Texas is doing some incredible things. It's just a very, very challenging region to grow wine. So a little bit more difficult here than it is in South Africa or California.
Yeah, absolutely. The weather volatility and things are just...
So we do, kind of a mix of both. I think at the moment we have 4 or 5 from Texas and about 11 or 12 from South Africa. Typically, the South African things are more popular, mostly because it's just unique, right? Like if you are going wine tasting around, Texas all around, and you get to South Africa, that's different.
Yeah.
We do tastings, glasses and bottles. We have a few things that are in limited supply, so they might be wine club specific. Actually, both of these bottles, the Chenin and our high-end bubbles, the MCC. Those are both wine club only, which is a new thing for us. But our wine club is super accessible. We just do 3 bottles 3 times a year. Comes with free tastings and glasses and all sorts of things. So if you come in for a tasting and you're like 2 of the bottles, you can basically leave with a 3rd bottle and pay less money if you join the club, which is an incredible deal. And we allow some aspect of customization in all of our clubs, so you can choose the bottles, which I feel like is important too. When you join a club, you should be able to get the wine that you like. So that's our focus kind of for the next year, is to work on building our wine club to help us kind of manage the supply and what we need to forecast.
Sure.
This last order that we just got from South Africa took about 8.5 months to put that order together, which is significantly longer than it's ever taken in the past. And so we're trying to get ahead of that and make sure that we don't run out, because it can take us a long time to get a new supply from South Africa. Or any other place in the world. There's just a lot of paperwork that is involved. Awesome. Cool. So I wanted to share with you our new Chenin Blanc.
Okay.
This is one of the wines that I'm most excited about having right now. This comes from Robertson as well, which is a higher elevation site. Comes from a vineyard named Erenstig, which is not a very old vineyard within South Africa. It's about 25 years old, which would be quite old for Texas.
Right.
But in South Africa, there's a lot of places. Like
those are young vines.
I think the MCC bottle that we had, that vineyard was established in like 1668. There's a lot of history there. But Chenin is the grape variety that South Africa was kind of built on. It was called Steen for a long time there before it was like rediscovered in the 1960s that it was actually Chenin Blanc. So a little bit about this vineyard site, Erenstig. They're up in the mountains, and the site that the Chenin Blanc is on is in like on a steep hillside where like the sun rises on this side. So in the morning, it's in the shadows.
Yeah.
And I just imagine these grapes like waking up so gently, like not having that direct sunlight and just warming up like really slowly throughout the day, and then getting the afternoon sun that they need to like power all their growth and the sugar production and all that. But I just imagine this as like such a soft, gentle awakening, and you can taste it in the wine. Actually, it's such a soft and beautiful wine. So these guys are all about like as little intervention as possible. We don't even use any commercial yeast for this, so just the natural yeast that they cultivate in the winery in the ambient air, which intentionally so is trying to express that terroir, that sense of place. So they don't want to influence the fruit by having a yeast that might impart grapefruit flavors or something, specific. And then it does go into oak, but just neutral oak barrels. So we're not trying to impart any flavors from the oak as well. And then one of the things that I just absolutely love about these bottles is the hand-dipped wax capsule at the top.
So it's something you see very often.
It's not anymore. It used to obviously be like the main way that they would do it. And the capsules are interesting. They used to do this so that it would cover the cork so that you wouldn't be able to tell if it was a corked bottle or not. Like you can see sometimes runs along the side that would indicate that maybe there was a problem there. So this is actually not designed for consumers. Like the intention was to be able to hide any mistakes that were there. The wax capsules work pretty well as an oxygen barrier, right? So there's nothing that's coming through this, although the corks typically would allow some micro-oxygenation. So usually there's a foil capsule that sits over the top, and you would use something like this, at least in a winery. These are so much faster than trying to use the little knife that comes on the keychain. So we'll typically use a foil cutter for the foils, but for wax capsules, you don't use those.
Yeah.
So I'll just show you real quickly how we open a wax capsule in case you ever do get one of these bottles or something else. And it's actually quite easy. So if you're not using a waiter's key, this is the only way that you should ever open a bottle of wine. You don't get rid of those rabbit ear things and all that other stuff. This is all you need. It's the most efficient way to do it. So we're just going to take our corkscrew and pretend like the wax isn't even there. And we're just going to go right through the wax and screw through. And then as we remove the cork, it's going to create a little perfect circle in the wax that will be all that we need to pour the wine through.
Oh, yeah.
So it just comes out.
Oh, wow. That's
like
really
that.
cool. It
Still
just splits
attached to it.
perfectly.
Yeah. So I'll pour you a little bit here, and we'll talk a little bit about the story of Chenin Blanc within South Africa.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So this is that zero intervention or little intervention is possible in every way, true expression of South African Chenin Blanc. So let's talk about Chenin Blanc and about the history of Chenin Blanc in South Africa. And to understand this, we have to go all the way back to the 1600s, which is just how old we are talking about these things.
Yeah.
It's just lovely. It's starting to open up a little bit. It's a little bit cold, so as it warms up a little bit, we'll get more of the aromatics. But the variety, of course, is known for having this kind of honey or honeysuckle flavor to it. Beautiful, bright fruit tones.
Yeah.
I get things like yellow apple, pineapple, some tropical fruit in there as well. It's just a beautiful expression of what South Africa does. Okay, so 1600s. If we look at Europe in the 1600s, there is one clear winner for the first part of the century.
Okay.
And that is the Portuguese.
Ooh, yeah.
So the Portuguese was a great seafaring nation, and they had figured out a way to build ships that were strong enough for them to be able to sail all the way around Africa and get to India for the spices.
Yeah.
And they became very good at this journey, and for about 50 years, they had kind of a lock on this spice trade, which made this Portuguese monarchy exceptionally wealthy.
Yeah.
Exceptionally wealthy. So everybody else started getting jealous, right? And they wanted to compete, but they had trouble doing that because of the extreme cost and expense and risk involved in seafaring in the 1600s. So they had done, some, like Columbus had already gone across the Atlantic and things like that. But the hard part was to get enough money to build the ships and pay the sailors. So the Dutch were the ones that ended up solving this by creating the world's first corporation, the Dutch East India Company. So in the 1600s, I think it was like 1650s, something around there, it was the first time that you, as a citizen of any country, were able to purchase shares in a company and participate in the wealth that that company made. Huge innovation. I mean, it was amazing. And so they all of a sudden had enough wealth to be able to build big seafaring ships that would be able to get around Africa. Now, they didn't end up going to India like the Portuguese did. Instead, they went to Indonesia. And in Indonesia, they had the peppercorns. So if you ever go today, it's amazing. I've been to Indonesia a couple different times. You can go to old Dutch forts that were built in the 1600s that are still, there, and you can pick the peppercorns, and they're amazing, and bring them back. So it's clearly that the Dutch was very involved in Indonesia at that time, but they had a problem.
Okay.
A lot of the sailors that would go on this journey, they'd be okay until they got to the long ocean voyage between South Africa and Indonesia. And what they found was that these guys were losing their teeth, going crazy, and dying.
Scurvy.
Well, they didn't have any idea what was going on. And so they did what anybody would do. They hired a doctor. They hired a Dutch surgeon in 1652 who was basically a guy with sharp tools. That was their understanding of medical science at the time. But his name was Jan van Riebeck, and he is considered the founding father of South Africa. So they sent him on a boat with about 80 men and 8 women, and they brought with them, seeds for everything that they could possibly bring, horses and goats and sheep and all the animals and pigs that they could fit on the boat with them.
Okay.
And they sailed to Cape Town, which was this beautiful natural harbor in South Africa. They took apart the boat to build their houses, but also so nobody could leave. They planted all the things that they brought with them, including Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley.
Yes.
So they brought it from its origins in France to South Africa and planted it at Constantia, which is the large vineyard at the base of Table Mountain. Still there today. Very famous vineyard. It's amazing because they have the captain's logs from all of this. So they have, the notes from like, this is when we planted and this was our first vintage and all of these things. So they have all of that. But basically the reason that they started and established the nation of South Africa, which is very weird, it's never been a corporation that has established a nation any other time in history. But they did that as a resupply post for the sailors, right? So they wanted to have a place for them to rest and to get the vegetables and things and food that they needed for the voyage across the ocean.
Okay.
And what they found was, when the sailors were at port or had fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, that they were okay. But when they were doing the long ocean voyages and surviving on like salted pork and fish and things, they were not.
Yeah.
So they had them eat the grapes, and the grapes seemed to help. And it turns out if you take those same grapes and make wine, and you put that wine into an oak barrel, that the barrel will protect the wine so it can stay for a significant period of time without going bad. And the sailors could, of course, drink the wine, which was no problem for them. And it turns out that there is just enough ascorbic acid, vitamin C, left in the wine to help protect the sailors from, scurvy, which was the issue. So if you were British, you probably had limes on board, which is why they're known as limeys. New Zealanders known as Kiwis, because that's their source of vitamin C on their ocean journeys. And South Africans, well, we don't really have a name for them, but if we did, I guess it might be drunks.
Winos.
Winos, exactly, yeah, exactly.
Well, and the wine barrels also, interestingly, provided ballast in the ships as well for those long journeys. So it's kind of a double...
I mean, monohulls are pretty rocky.
Thing, right, yeah.
Anything that you could kind of help to do that. But it's just interesting that, like, really the history, the story of South Africa began with wine. Like, it was the intention of starting it there. And Chenin Blanc has done exceptionally well in South Africa. It is the world's largest plantings of Chenin Blanc are in South Africa. So while France does, of course, a lot more wine overall, South Africa does about twice the volume of Chenin, making them the world's leading producer of Chenin. And in South Africa, you'll find it dry, you'll find it sweet, sparkling, fortified into brandy. In a lot of ways, it was the workhorse that sort of built South African wine. And right around the 60s or so, we started to get this shift away from bulk wine into more quality productions. And they've really taken Chenin and made it the star of the show, which is really beautiful. So one of my favorite wines overall, and a lovely example of what South Africa does, and the history and the all of it wrapped up into one glass is beautiful.
Well, question about fruit and sourcing. When you import your bottles, I presume you're working with several different, you'd already mentioned a couple of them, locations there in South Africa and these other places that are then producing the wine. They're harvesting the fruit, they're producing the wine, bottling it, doing all the barrel aging, all the stuff needs to be done, the bottling, and they ship you the bottles, and then you apply your labels to them?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sort of. So most of the guys that I work with, I've been working with for 10 years down there now. Every once in a while, we'll bring on new suppliers, but it's few and far between, and that's because of the licensing process that we have to go through in Texas. So anybody that's making wine for the Texas market, but is not physically located in Texas, still has to have a license, what they call a non-resident seller's permit, to be able to produce wine for the Texas market. So it's challenging and expensive, and there's monthly report. It's a lot to bring on new people to do that. So we could work with a lot more people, but we can't.
The challenges are there, yeah.
So we have to focus and be really choosy about who we work with, and we want to have partners that are in it for the long haul, because to do one shipment with one producer, it doesn't make sense because of how much it goes into it. So we really look for people that are working for us in the long haul. That's actually a better model for us anyways, because we can produce things through a custom crush. So where they're making things specifically for us.
That was my next question.
From their fruit.
Yeah.
Everyone right now that is doing South African wine is doing it the same way, where we're bottling it, labeling it, and bringing it over palletized from South Africa to Texas. The reason for that is that it's the safest or the least riskiest way to do it because it is a 45 to 55 day ocean journey to get here over the equator. And so there's a lot of things that could go wrong. I think, and I've been working on this for a couple of months now, with the threat of tariffs, which are very likely coming our way, that is a direct hit for us. And I think that there's going to be a difference in the tariffs applied to bottled, finished wine versus bulk, unfinished wine.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to solve this puzzle. Right?
Yeah,
this
another one of
puzzle
those puzzles.
on how do I bring over bulk wine from the same producer, the same wine, right? Just not in a bottle, but not in a barrel, but in like 1,000-liter totes. How do I bring that over safely?
Yeah.
And it's a puzzle, right? Because one of the things that we're worried about, oxygen exposure, volatile acidity, there's a lot of chemistry that's happening that we won't be able to intervene with while it's in a shipping container.
For sure. Things out of your control.
So I don't really have a solution for this yet, but I've been working on the problem for a while. And I think if I can solve it, it's going to give us a huge advantage. One of the issues that we deal with right now is that, maybe this one has a wax capsule, but this one doesn't.
Yeah.
We don't have the consistency across the brand because we are using different suppliers to do it. But if I can bring it over and have control
of your own bottling,
then I can make branded corks and have the capsules all match and the same kind of bottles so they fit nicely on the shelves and, to have more brand unity.
Sure.
So one of the challenges there is that whoever bottles the wine assumes the liability for it.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So even though it's our brand, if someone else bottles it for us, they're assuming that liability. So a lot of people don't want to work with wine that they're not familiar with because they don't want to assume the liability for that. So it's been a challenge for us to find the right people that are willing to share that risk with us. And really, like, it's our risk, but technically they have to assume it to do that. So it's a lot of puzzles. But I think if we can figure out how to do it in 1,000 liters, because it already exists for like 40,000 liters, right? Like the big guys in California that are making stuff from Chile and Argentina, like it shows up in a giant milk truck and it's all just liquid, right? But I can't do 40,000
you're trying to
bottles
figure out a
of
way
wine.
to scale it down.
So I need to do what I call mini bulk. Mini bulk. And it's a challenge right now, but we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, some of we talked a little bit about your Tannat and other things that, are you doing a custom crush here in the Hill Country or?
So we have like some consultants that are helping with us. So it's even a little bit more than custom crush because we have like a winemaker that's working specifically with us. So he's producing it, but he's following sort of our.
You get to put your influence there.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually we're working with Pebble Rock out of Johnson City. So if you know Rob and Lydia.
Oh yeah, I did. They were my 5th episode of the podcast.
I mean, incredible people.
Yes, they are.
And exceptionally knowledgeable. So Lydia has been helping us with the vineyard this year. And then her husband, Rob, is the winemaker. So he's helping us to do the wine. And it's been a great experience. I've learned a tremendous amount from both of them.
Yeah.
Lovely people.
Good people, yes.
Well, there's a lot of good people in wine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so that's interesting. Well, what then would you say? You've already introduced me to 2 great wines here. What are some of just from your perspective? We'll talk about customers in a moment, but what are some of your favorite wines that y'all produce that you sell that you're selling here?
So that's a hard question because it changes a lot.
Yeah. Your palate changes.
Well, just, the weather, what I'm eating, who I'm with. Like, I'm an equal opportunity wine enjoyer in that I don't have a specific one that I always kind of turn to, but I do have some favorites. And so one of our favorites, one of my favorites, certainly is Pinotage. So you know a little bit about wine. You've done through like the WSET experience.
Pinotage.
So Pinotage is typically like the trick question that you get on a lot of those tests, and it is because it's so uniquely South African. So Pinotage was created in 1924-25 by crossing Pinot Noir with Cinsault.
Yep.
And Cinsault is a grape that we see here in Texas. It makes a very lovely rosé.
Yeah.
But outside of Texas, it's much more commonly used as a blending grape, because it'll really beef up a wine that feels a little bit thin. Now, this isn't a blend. It is 100% Pinotage, and the same way that like a kid is not exactly 50% mom or 50% dad, like it created its own kind of thing, Pinotage. So it's quite a distinct grape. It's a little bit like a more full-bodied Pinot Noir, but there's a smokiness to the grape. It's known for the vibrancy in its color, and distinctly South African. So I know there's a few people like maybe in California, maybe even here in Texas that are trying to grow Pinotage, but I never in my life have seen a bottle of Pinotage that didn't come out of South Africa.
Right.
So it's really only commercial production in South Africa. It's a really interesting story. It's kind of like a legend of how it was created with, I believe the winemaker's name was Abraham Pernal.
Okay.
He was the first winemaker ever tapped to bring wine into the university system. So he was the guy who literally wrote the textbook on how to grow wine in South Africa.
Okay.
But he was really it was kind of like this mad scientist, a little bit like, a lot of winemakers are like kind of small, quirky individuals. They've got their own things that they're into. So this guy was really into genetics in 1924, which was their understanding of genetics was Gregor Mendel, as I have a red flower, I have a white flower, it makes a pink flower. That was their understanding. But he decided to take the two grapes and cross them, and it's not easy to do because grape flowers are tiny, right? So he's using tweezers and taking the stamens out of the male flower and rubbing it onto the female flower of the Cinsault, and then tracking that flower to turn into a specific grape, and then using those 4 seeds to plant to get started. I often talk about in my stories how wine takes time. Like nothing happens quickly in wine. So they created this in 1924. He literally gets to work writing the book on how to grow wine in South Africa and gets kind of overwhelmed with that. So I say that it's kind of like a big fish story because there's multiple different ways that the story has been told. But in one of them, he plants them in the university garden. And the other one, he plants the vines at his home, which is next to the university. In both of them, he kind of neglects it for 20 years. In one story, he retires. In another one, he dies. But is always the second professor that comes through and sort of saves a Pinotage vine. So literally in one of the stories,
whatever route we take to get there.
Yeah, he's riding his bicycle past and he sees they're bulldozing the house that he lived in, and there's the vine peeking out, and he literally saves it out of the dirt. And then the other one is he dies, and then the grapes are planted in the garden, and he's looking through boxes and boxes and boxes of rough drafts of his book until he finds a map of the garden with Cinsault and Pinot Noir. However, it wasn't Cinsault actually at that time. So in South Africa, the grape Cinsault, when it was first brought to the country, was named after the place it came from because it came from France, and they named everything after the place, not the grape.
Yeah.
So it came from Hermitage.
Yeah.
And Hermitage, very famous because that's the name hermit, and comes from that. It's like a knight who went to the Crusades and came back and didn't want to talk to anybody and lived on top of the mountain. Now, it's my understanding that most of that mountain is surrounded, or hill, I guess, is surrounded by Syrah, but it's not the only grape that's planted there. So somehow they grabbed one of the Cinsault vines and then called it Hermitage when it arrived. So there's, a lot of confusion historically and about naming things for the place instead of the grape. But anyways, they called it Hermitage and Pinot Noir, so that's where the name Pinotage came from. That second professor slowly started to propagate the vines so that we could have enough for a planting. They did some testing with different rootstocks to see what would be a good combination. And it wasn't until 1959 that the very first planting of Pinot Noir was ever harvested. So we went from 1924 to 1959 before we ever got a vintage of it.
Yeah.
Which is quite late. And that producer was Bellevue, which is a very famous place in South Africa, still making amazing Pinotage there today. And it slowly started to kind of catch on, and by the time that Pinotage became popular within South Africa, they started going through apartheid.
Yeah.
So apartheid is when South Africa is basically cut off from the world stage for a significant period of time. So no Olympics, no international wine competitions, and no trade with like a lot of nations. So their wine industry struggled with that. There's a lot of things that we need in wine for the technology and trade to make that work, but they persisted on, and Pinotage is growing in popularity during that time. In 1994, Nelson Mandela is released from prison. 95, he becomes the president, and hey, South Africa's back. You can go to the Olympics, you can do the wine competitions, you know all the things. So I think it was like in 95 or 96, they sent Pinotage off to like a big competition in Singapore. It's a big competition today. I don't think it was a big competition in 1996, but there's only 2 free ports in Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore. So now like when they have the huge Sotheby's auctions and the Chinese billionaires come, like it's always in those places where they do it. So there's a lot of money in wine going through those places. But in 1995, it wasn't that popular. Anyways, they send off the wine and they win like not only best winemaker in the world, but best wine for the Pilotage. And literally, like sommeliers in London and New York.
Yeah, like what is this?
I've never even heard of this grape.
Yeah.
Like, how can we not have that? Like, we want it, right? And so, in response to this huge spike in demand, they plant a ton of Pinotage. And today, 1 in every 12 vines in South Africa is a Pinotage vine. So it's a significant number of the plantings. And a lot of it happened in that like 95, 96, 97, late 90s.
That was their own judgment of Paris there, the judgment of Singapore.
In a way, okay, because while the judgment of Paris put California on the map and really like signified that they're here to stay, South Africa fumbled the ball.
Oh no.
So in order to meet that demand, right, because all throughout apartheid, like they're producing Pinotage for domestic consumption, not for international markets.
Right. Distribution.
So they need to plant like a ton of it. And as you know, young vines do not make great wine.
Yeah.
So they were harvesting like year 2 when, you shouldn't be. And they were making wine and oaking it for like 3 months because the demand was there and they needed to get it out now the door. So the very first Pinotages that arrived in London in particular, I mean, the notes are rubber bands and burnt tires and Band-Aids and bananas. And I mean, these are real wine notes, but they are not the ones you want on your wine.
You're looking for, right?
And so their first experience was, this is horrific. And no, we don't want this.
Thanks anyway.
Yeah. So they didn't order a lot of it. And particularly in America, we never had it. Like, the first impression was terrible. And so it never caught on. Well, all of those vines stayed there and have now aged 30 years and are producing world-class Pinotage again. And I think now the world is ready for those kind of like weird grapes that pop up every once in a while from different places. People are ready to experiment. In Texas, we have a lot of varieties that we grow that are not the ones that are, most places in California and New York are grapes that people would think to ask for. So we do a lovely Viognier. We don't have a Chardonnay from Texas. We have a Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa. Doesn't do that great here. So there are other grapes that we grow, and I think that the Texas wine drinking population is willing to experiment now, and they're familiar with 10 years of, okay, this is something new. I've never had that before. Let me try it. And for us, once you try Pinotage, it's such an exceptionally well-crafted wine. It's so unique. It's so beautiful. And wait, I can't get this at H-E-B or even at Specs or Total Wine. Oh, so I think it's the rarity that drives the popularity of it as far as the sales go. But Pinotage is probably 3-1 our best seller. We have both the standard and the reserve Pinotage that is wine club only. But just an exceptionally beautiful, rare wine that's, I mean, we don't trade with South Africa like for anything, right? So obviously H-E-B, like there's California, there's Italy, there's Spain, there's France, there's a few Texas, but there's nothing from South Africa. If you go to Specs or Total Wine, like there's 400 from France, 300 from Italy, 200 from Spain, 200 from California, maybe like 10 from Texas. They're trying, but they're struggling, And by the time you get to South Africa, there's usually like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And almost always, it's going to be grapes that you'll recognize because South Africa itself is already the risk, right? So it's like, what does a South African cab tastes like. And like I was going to buy Adam, who's
a
my Main
Merlot
Street
even.
manager, a beautiful bottle that they said they had listed on the website. And then I showed up and they didn't have it, of course. But they had 3 bottles, all from South Africa, all Cabernet, all looked identical. One was $13, one was $50, and one was like, $20
Quite a
or
range,
something.
right?
But it was all like the same stuff, because logistically, it is the furthest place on the planet to try and bring wine to. I mean, it's a lot closer to go to Chile or Argentina or even Europe.
Yeah.
So it's quite challenging to get wine from South Africa to the States, and that's why most people don't do it. You know? It's the least represented wine region on the U.S. market.
Well, I love this. It's interesting because it's opening up more over time as well. It seems like every time I taste it, I'm getting a different note, a different flavor coming through.
As you should with a well-crafted wine. So it's starting to evolve. We just opened this bottle as well. It's a 2021, so it does have a little bit of age to it. The reserve is a 2020. So we're starting to pick up some of those like tertiary notes and things too in the wine. So you know about primary, secondary, tertiary notes? It might be interesting for your listeners. A lot of people think that would be the first thing you taste, the second thing that you taste, and the third thing that you taste. But it's really more about like where those flavors develop during the winemaking process. So for Pinotage, like if you're trying that wine and you went out into the vineyard and you picked a grape, you would taste some of that red and black berries kind of note, so fruitiness, right? That's also in the wine. So if the flavor is found in the grape and in the wine, that's a primary flavor. Secondary means that it develops during the winemaking process. So like you taste it in the wine, but it doesn't exist in the grapes. And there's a lot of chemistry that happens during those first couple weeks of fermentation. So not surprising that happens, but interesting all the same. And then tertiary flavors only develop as the wine has been stored in bottle. And typically that takes 3 to 5 years. So one of the ways that I like to explain tertiary flavors is like the difference between like a fresh strawberry, like a strawberry, and strawberry jam. Like there's like a caramelization of the sugars that's happening. It becomes more complex, but also more subtle, right? So it's not the, ooh, that's a strawberry, like the brightness, right? It's more of a, like, oh, there's strawberry, but there's almost like, is there vanilla in there or like caramel or
a fresh fruit versus a dried fruit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of more interesting and typically a little bit softer as we go along. And these ones now that we're 21, so we're at the end of 24 now, we're just starting to see those tertiary flavors develop in the standard, and in some of them, like we have a few 2018s that we still have on the menu. So those are exquisite examples of tertiary flavors, and you can't really find typically, like you go to the grocery store, it's this year for the previous year, but it's very hard to find vintage bottles. Grocery stores don't want to store them that way, and it's very difficult in Texas to store wine properly at home. So it's kind of unique when you can buy an old bottle somewhere.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the most popular wine selections that you have with customers? What are the ones that you have a hard time keeping in stock because customers, I gotta try that, I gotta get that?
It's surprising. We have a range of different things. Like last wine competition that we did was the San Antonio Rodeo.
Yeah.
We sent 10 wines and we got 10 medals back.
Oh, nice.
So we really focus a lot on trying to have every wine be representative of its variety, right? Like be a good example of that, represent the place where it comes from, but also be delicious. So we have kind of something for everybody. We've got 3 different bubbles at the moment. We've got 5 dry whites. We have 6 dry reds. We have some sweet wines as well, some Texas like Moscato and Mourvedre, as well as a South African sweet red blend, and one of those bubbles is white. So we can hit kind of
the whole palette.
Yeah, anywhere that you're looking for, whether you're a big bold red drinker or you're more of a crisp white drinker or you're into bubbles, we'd like to think that we have something that everyone will find something they'll enjoy while they're here. What I wasn't expecting, like the intention was for everybody to be able to find one. What I'm often finding is that people come in, they'll do a tasting. We got a couple different tastings of 4 wines, and they're like, oh my God, I like all of them.
Yeah.
And as somebody who goes around and does tastings, that's not always the case, right? Like usually you do a tasting, you're like, oh, this one is fantastic, or maybe I like these too, but to like all four is quite unique.
Yeah.
So some of our most popular ones have been the bubbles, that MCC, the beautiful bottle. We actually have a 3-liter, so double magnum of those that we just got in. So those are big, impressive bottles that I think everybody wants, but of course they're expensive, so those are hard to find. But Pinotage, my personal favorite at the moment is this Cab Blend, which is basically a Bordeaux style, a left bank Bordeaux. So 50% Cab, 30% Malbec, and 20% Petit Verdot.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful, well-structured wine that could age for 10 to 15 years. It's just gorgeous. Pinotage, because of the rarity in the market, I think is one of the most popular ones. Of the new whites, that Chenin is just spectacular. But there's really something for everybody.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, what about let's talk about the location here for just a moment. You talked about your space and the amount you could hold inside, outdoors, get outdoor space of the balconies and all that, the decks. Do you ever hold like events or things like that here? What types of things?
Yeah, so we opened up just in March of this year at this property, so not even a year into it now. We've had a number of events, like we did one for the Eclipse, we had one for industries for welcome to them to the property, one for our wine club members when we first got it started, and then of course our pickup events and parties happen out here. So we do kind of 3 big events a year with the pickup parties where we have music and food and pairings for all those things. And then other events that we kind of try to put together. Some of the things I would love to do would be to bring in like a Christmas market next year and do that underneath the trees. But I find like we have 2 locations and 4 total employees.
Yeah.
And I'm spread too thin to really plan a lot of those things. So if there's anybody out there that is looking for a venue that would love to do a particular kind of event, whether that's something related to the wine, like if you have a group of people that want to come and do, experience, we can cater to that. Or if you have a corporation or like a business that wants to come and bring like a, kind of sort of like a bond or team building kind of exercise, something like that, where it's just kind of fun and relaxed.
Team dinners, things like that.
Yeah, team dinners. We don't do a lot of food here, so mostly focused on the wine. But yeah, any kind of like group activity, if you're looking for a venue and you think that this would be a good experience for your team or for your family or whatever it is, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you about the opportunities that are available here.
All right.
So some of the ways that people can reach us if they wanted to do that, of course, we have a website. That's coordinatesvineyards.com. So COORDINATES Vineyards, VINEYARDS, all one word, or .com. So if you want to email us, it's just wine@coordinatesvineyards.com, which is a great way. Or of course, you can give us a ring and just call us up when we're open. That number is 830-307-7400.
Perfect.
So reach out to us anytime. Email is probably the best way to reach me directly, and it comes straight to my phone. I respond to all those. So if you're interested in doing an event or setting up a tasting, you can make reservations online or just send us an email, and we'd love to talk to you.
Well, listeners are getting excited. They want to come check the place out. So let's talk about what a tasting might look like.
Sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about it, 4 different wines. What type of wines do you typically do? Do you have a set flight that people choose, or do the customers pick the wines they want to taste?
We have 2 set flights at the moment. They rotate, so they're not always the same. So if you've done a tasting with us before, it might be different when you come back. Typically a tasting is built to kind of like start with the lightest and move towards the heavier wines.
Right.
So that's all designed for your palate to be able to experience each of them. So I feel like a curated tasting is very different than just picking stuff that you want, because we can actually build it to be the best experience that it is. So for both of our tastings at the moment, we start with our bubbles, either the Reserve MCC or with the Sparkling Brut, which is that first one. We just find that's a great way to get people started. It's light, it's refreshing. It kind of cleanses the palate from whatever they may have had before that. It gives us an opportunity to introduce them into the space and find somewhere that they're going to be comfortable for those tastings. Kind of build a rapport with them while we've got something fun and light. And then we go on into either our mixed tasting, which goes through our Viognier, and then into the Pinotage and the Shiraz from South Africa. or our reserve line, which is all red. So we've got a Pinot Noir, the Pinotage, and the Reserve Cab blend. We're pretty flexible with that. So like some people show up and they say, I love reds, but I just don't like bubbles. So we'll substitute one for the other one there. And, like we want people to have the best experience. But I wouldn't necessarily just throw in like a random red there. I have an intention on how I want to build
your pathway.
that tasting. Yeah, your pathway. So that the experience that you have is like, ooh, this is even better than the last one, right? We always want to build it that way. It also lets us save on glassware, so we don't have to do glasses all the time. And I know a lot of places that you walk into, they'll pour all 4 of your tastings and give you something.
On a board, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there's some descriptions about it along the way, but I find that we always use one glass. The tastings are built to build upon that, right? So that the wine that's in the glass is never going to overshadow the next one that's poured into it. So it's intentional there. But it gives us a chance to come and have a touch point and tell the next story. And I think that it's really too much all at once, and that you have to experience it while you're tasting the wine. And then it does physically change and enhance the experience that you have to do it well, to do it properly. So that's why we run our tastings that way. Our mixed tastings around $25. Our reserve tastings about $35. Both of those become free if you join the club at any point, or free for members. We also do free glasses for them when we see them and things like that. Different levels of the club, of course. We have a 3, a 6, and a 12 bottle club, again with different discounts and different levels and things as well. But our goal is really to make it the best experience that we can for everybody that walks through the door, whether they're interested in the wine or not. People that come in and just want to hear about the house, and we go for a little tour and tell stories.
And can people sign up for your wine club online, or do they do it at the location, or both? Or
you can absolutely sign up for it online. You can order things online. We can ship to about 33 states. So we use Wine Cub for that, but like most places that are doing fulfillment here in the Hill Country. So you can sign up online, but I would recommend to anybody, don't sign up for a wine club even the first time that you go somewhere.
Yeah.
Go 2 or 3 times and make sure it's a place you want to go back to, and make sure it's somewhere that you're going to enjoy the wine, not just the first time, but every time. And I think that obviously is detrimental to me to say that you should go and experience it a few times. But the wine club members that I'm looking for are the people that are going to be with us for years to come. Like we spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of effort. Our wine club members, we really take care of them. And I think it's a very different experience here than it is at some of the other bigger places. And so the wine club members that we have, we intend to keep them for a significant period of time, and hope that we can provide them extended value over that time.
You're building that community and that family around.
And actually, that's one of the things that I talk about a lot. Like, our pickup parties are amazing, not because of the food and the wine, but because of the people that will come in. Like, everybody has the same shared experience that they've loved. And I cannot even count the number of times people have come up to me and said that they've left a party or an event with new lifelong friends.
Yeah.
And that, again, right, like the focus is about wine, and using wine as a vehicle to bring people together and to build community. So like that to me is even more valuable than, I came and I had a great wine. That's great. But like, if I came and I left with lifelong friends, like that's a more powerful experience.
Yeah.
So our wine club events are pretty amazing, and we really focus on trying to draw in like I work all the time. Like I run 2 locations. This is everything. It is all that I do all the time. So for me, these events are like the one time that I get to have fun and like, hang out with everybody.
Yeah.
And so it's really like, it's pretty neat to have this experience where I feel like it's, all my friends are coming over, and they're having fun. So it's like a big party at somebody's house with a little bit more organization. And we just have such a unique and special group of people. Like, I'm really impressed by the people that have chosen us to be wine club members, and they're amazing, and we all get along so well. And it's just such a cool experience to come and hang out with that group of people.
Well, you mentioned a couple times 2 locations. We talked a lot about this. You still have your Main Street location open?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we remember we were looking for this property because the owner was selling that one.
Yeah.
So it was bought by the Scripps family, which has been amazing. They're incredible, humble, and remarkable people within Fredericksburg. We're so lucky to have them as new owners. So we were able to renew our lease there for the next 3 years. So now we definitely have that one, and we absolutely have this one.
Cool. So that way, if you're in the city directly, you can go there, or you can come out here to the hut.
It's actually, so Main Street operates more like a wine bar. Like we do a lot of glasses, we do a lot of tastings, but most people are walking around Main Street. They don't carry bottles, and particularly not cases and stuff around. So it's really unique that you have like the true vineyard experience here. You can come out, you can get all the education, you can do all that stuff. And then using your same membership, right? Like you can go into town if you're in Fredericksburg, you can get a glass of wine at, 8, 9 o'clock at night because we're open late there. So you can go out to dinner and still use your membership for that, or you can come out here and experience the vineyard and have that. So it's kind of, they're quite different experiences with kind of a similar feeling or like thread that ties them together.
Okay.
And it's different. Not everybody has multiple locations like that.
What about your operating hours?
Yeah, so we do 12 to 7, kind of as a base. Okay, so Main Street is going to be 12 to 7 Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday.
Okay.
With Friday and Saturday staying open until 9 o'clock, so 12 to 9. Those are our like winter hours. So typically we've been open from 12 to 9 and 12 to 10 on Friday, Saturdays.
Okay.
Out here, it's been a little bit slower. Like this summer was not what anybody was expecting. And so we ended up changing Wednesdays and Thursdays to be reservation only. And that allowed me time to like take care of things in the vineyard where I wasn't sure when people were going to come in all the time. So it's hard to be, knee deep in mud and
Gloves and all that.
all of it, right? So it kind of lets me plan my time a little bit better, do big projects like building the big billboard that we had out there or taking care of the weeds around the property and all sorts of stuff. But always happy to have reservations for those times. And then we run Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 7 here as well. So we'll be open until 7 o'clock tonight on Sunday as well. And I'm working right now that we have the new wines, I'm working on kind of a pairing project to bring those Wednesdays and Thursdays to not just be a reservation, because this is a little different than a typical wine reservation, but to be like I want to call it like reservation with the owner.
Okay.
And so it's just us, small groups, like one reservation at a time, not multiple things going on. And you come in, maybe you have 2, maybe you have 4, maybe you have 6, maybe you have 8, something like that, but small groups with pairings, with the new wines, with the stories that come with them, the experience that we have, and make it 2 hours of storytelling and wine and, the food that comes along with it, but really about the education and the experience and spending that time together and really being able to focus on one group and one reservation and elevate that experience. So we'll be rolling that out. We're going to do it through our wine club first and let our wine club members come and experience it and get feedback from them. And then we'll be rolling that out to kind of the general public probably in the spring.
Okay. And then the reservations can be done on your website?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So reservations for any of those days can be made online right now. And when we get to those elevated kind of reservation experiences, we'll add that as an option. So for the moment, it's not listed, but you can make a reservations for, we just call it like a tasting experience. So you can choose upon arrival which tasting you would be interested in. And you can make it for either location. So either for Main Street or for here in High. And and lots of different options for whatever people are interested in.
And when people load up their minivan to come out, family friendly, pet friendly, tell me about some of those things.
Absolutely. All of the above. So family is a really big part of why we're doing this. My brother and I working together, but we really understand that it's valuable to be able to bring your family and have that experience together. One thing, like if you're bringing younger kids, we cannot let them drink the wine. There is some rules in Texas where like if you're over 16 and you're with your parents, then you are allowed to consume alcohol. That's great. Please do that at home. Yeah. For us, it's not a liability issue.
Something you can control,
I don't know if you're the parent. I don't know if you're the legal guardian. And I have had people trick me before. So it's something that we're not willing to assume the liability for. The risks are just too high. Sure. It doesn't make sense for us to do that. And we're all about educating people, but I don't think we need to be educating 16-year-olds about alcohol.
Right.
So family friendly for sure, and we do have some like games and things to keep kids busy. I often find that there is a kind of a younger kids are fine, usually with like a tablet or something that parents bring with them, and they're fine. Or outside, we've got a lot of space. They love to play with rocks and sticks and things like that. The group that I find is difficult is like the young teens, so maybe like 11 through 13. They get bored quickly. They run out of things to do fast. They know all the games and things that we have available for them. So more than welcome to bring them, involve them in the tasting, let them hear the education, or besides involve them, like not giving them the wine, but let them participate in the experience. As an educator, I do well with kids. The hard part is when people come and they expect to be able to have a tasting as if they didn't have children and expect us to take care of them. And I don't have the time to be able to do that. We don't have enough staff for that. So as long as people are expecting to be in charge of their children while they're here, more than welcome to bring them. Let's make an experience and involve them in it, Dogs as well. We've got a lot of property here, a lot of space, so we can do dogs. It is a issue with the health department to have them inside. So they're always on the porches or in the picnic tables outside, but we have a lot of lovely covered, comfortable seating areas outside for them.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
What about food options? Do you provide anything like that, or can people bring their own food?
We do have some options. We work with a company that's just out of Dripping Springs that does these beautiful little cheese spreads. So we do have them, but during the slowdown over this past summer, they've stopped delivering as frequently. So we are running out of them kind of often. There is some liability issues with bringing in food from outside.
It's a whole other license too.
Well, we can do it as long as people bring it in, but they have to understand that, like, if you bring food and get sick from that is like, I have nothing to do with that, So I think it's fine for people to bring stuff in. Be mindful, not just here, but anywhere that you're going, that if you're bringing things and producing a lot of trash, that's things that people have to take care of for you, or if you need plates and stuff like that. So if you're self-contained and you've got little munchies and it's not a problem or disturbing other people, like, that's great. I'm all for it. I love it. And I think food is an important part of the wine experience. And so if you have things that you enjoy, or if you have dietary restrictions, you should absolutely be able to bring something along. We do have some snacks and things available because we know that, like, we want you to be able to feel safe, particularly to drive, and we offer water to everybody that's here. The issue is that we don't really have like a full commercial kitchen.
Right.
And we're not busy enough to be able to do like charcuterie boards where we're going through and cutting and preparing a lot of things ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I did those on Main Street for quite some time, maybe about 6 to 8 months, and we were just throwing away like $60 worth of brie every 5 days because of the regulations around it. So what I would love to do is to get to the point where we're busy enough, like we have enough people coming through, to have a food truck on site that can service all of those people and provide food that pairs with the wine. So if there's anybody out there that has a food truck that's looking for a home, we would love to host you. We would love to have somebody on site. And again, it's just, like, I personally don't have enough time to be designing recipes and preparing things, but I would love to have more food. I think the entire corridor here needs more food throughout the area, and would love to bring some of that in. So we're going to start with kind of those elevated tastings that'll have some simple options. We always want to have like a few little simple things here and there. Welcome to bring simple things as well. And typically I find, like, anywhere that you want to do that, just ask ahead of time, like it makes such a good thing if, like, hey, I brought a little snackle box. If you've ever seen them, they're amazing. It's like a charcuterie board and a tackle box. It's called snackle box. They're amazing. I brought something. Is it okay if I enjoy that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like some water? Do you need some plates? That's very different than I walk in and there's cheese all over the floor.
Yeah.
So it's just about being respectful and kind and aware of those things. And for the most part, our experience here is pretty intimate. It's pretty small. It's relatively quiet. It's not the crazy bachelorette groups. And so the experiences that we have with our customers are amazing. Like, they are really smart and intelligent and interesting and kind. And I love the experiences that we have with people.
Do you have any maximum group sizes, since you've got a kind of limited staff?
Boy, anytime you're going to show up to a winery with more than 12 people,
always make a reservation.
Make a reservation, absolutely. Like, you should warn people that you're coming.
Yeah.
I've done groups up to about 25 on my own, which is intense at times. Like if you're doing a tasting, you're basically
It's a lot of pouring. We're talking
starting over again and starting over again. So it gets kind of difficult as far as the space here goes. I think we have like a little table room that does great for like 8 to 12. So that works excellent for like a group size. We can do 20 or so in the main room. The problem is it just gets, with groups that big, it gets real loud and nobody's really focused on the same time. So we can absolutely pour you wine, but it's a very different experience to show up with 20 than it is to show up with 8, it's just a different experience. So it depends. We can do all sorts of things depending on what people are looking for. But I find that the kind of that ideal size is somewhere between like 8 to 12, just works great. Where if you have more than 12, then maybe some people aren't paying attention, aren't interested, or don't feel like they get a chance to ask questions. But that's kind of a good number for us.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think are your busier, slower times? What's the best time for somebody to come visit?
Well, the best time is to come when it's slow, right? Because then you get a more intimate experience. So typically in the area, like we have this saying where January, June, and July, that's all the J's. January, June, and July are kind of the slowest months of the year. So Fredericksburg in particular is quite popular during the Christmas season. So then right in January, we start to see a dip off from that. It'll pick up like around February or so.
Starts warming up.
Valentine's Day, and wildflowers, spring break, and then kind of off through the summer. But it gets pretty hot. This year, actually, we never really reached those 100 temperatures.
Until August, September,
It was beautiful this summer in the hill country, but typically it can be quite hot and oppressive. And a lot of places don't have a lot of indoor seating. So that can be tough, particularly if you're in the sun trying to drink reds. So like those kind of are the slower months for the season. I mean, I think the wildflowers are so incredible that it's just a gorgeous time to visit the area. Just go drive around and experience that. In the fall, when the leaves start to change and the temperatures drop, it is also fantastic. Like we have a family ranch that's about an hour from here. And I remember that first day in October where it was like cool enough to sit outside all day. And we did. We just sat on the porch all day and had wine and had food. And like we kept like getting snacks. But nobody wanted to go inside because it was so pleasant to be outside. So I think the shoulder seasons are kind of the most pleasant time to be here. But Christmas season is also fantastic. And depending on what you want to see with the vineyards, what experience you want to have, like there's always a different time of year is always going to give you a different piece of the puzzle. So even in a time like this, there's still things to learn in the vineyard.
Cool. So what kind of plans do you have for future growth out here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, already we've sort of taken a step with this second location that was growth that I personally don't know if I was ready for that. Like it was a lot of new puzzles right away when I feel like I'd just gotten my feet kind of underneath me on Main Street. So a lot of the growth comes from my brother, who's a plastic surgeon, but also intimately involved in the business. And he sort of can see the bigger picture from further away than I can. And so he says he likes to manage the forest, not the trees.
Yeah.
And it's my job to kind of manage the trees. So for growth, I think there's a couple of different things, but initially when we started on Main Street, I thought we maybe had like 3 to 5 years to kind of reach a place where we would be kind of comfortable and have consistency enough in the club and things like that to make us stable. I think we're still 3 to 5 years from that goal. So even though it's been 3 years, like things have changed dramatically. And we're getting kind of towards there. So we're focusing on growing the club and keeping club members to provide us with consistency and forecasting for what we need for supply. But for where we see ourselves going, I would love to bring more production in-house. We have a guy working for us now who produced an amazing Texas white blend while he was at Brenham. And I would love for him to be our full-time winemaker, but we don't have a space for that yet. So then we got to think about, okay, if we build a production building, like what kind of capacity would we need for that? If we're going to do our mini bulk, we would need some sort of bottling aspect to be able to, like we'd at least have to have a truck come up and park there. If we're bringing in things in pallets, we need space that is temperature controlled. We want to barrel storage. Exactly. I want to be able to take people through there as part of an educational experience. Maybe we have lab space in that building. So what does that building look like? How big is it? What is it going to cost to build that? What does our production need to be at to be able to make a return on that investment? Because it's going to cost a significant outlay to buy all that stuff. And right now we are tiny, like even smaller than small. We're boutique. So we do less than 1,000 cases a year, which is probably not the time to build that building, right? So we need to get to a point where we're doing maybe 5,000 to 8,000 cases a year, where we can put in that production facility, building for growth. We think we have a place on the property to be able to do that. And then beyond that, so one of the historical pieces of the property, we think we want to put the production building kind of next to the road there, and also be able to use it as like billboard and signage and things, so people can see us, and maybe use that to block some of the road noise. But then the second meadow on the property leads up to this pile of stones now, which is the first cotton gin in the area. So it was built in 1890. It's the boiler for the cotton gin. And I would love to take those stones and repurpose them into like an outdoor bar and market, kind of like Joanna's Market, where you could get, a glass of wine, but also a sandwich or something from the market without having to come all the way back into the house.
That's cool.
So we kept everything close to the house right now, just for service, and we, only running 1 or 2 employees a day, so we don't have a lot of people that really head out there. But once we do pick up and get busier, particularly if we have buses coming quite often, I think that would be an excellent area for expansion. The family ranch that we own, that's about an hour from here, is towards Mason, so it's in the Curry Sands or the Llano Uplift, which is a really interesting AVA. It's all these little islands, right? So we live on a granite outcropping kind of behind Enchanted Rock from here, which would absolutely be a part of that. And we've looked at, like we had Atlas come out, Jackie Mancuso, to look at putting in grapes there. The thing is, it's so expensive, right? Like the capital outlay to put in the grapes, 3 years ahead, we're looking at, 35,000 an acre plus maintenance costs. And where the ranch is located, it's like 2 miles down a dirt road. So nobody's ever going to see it,
Yeah.
So does it make sense for us to plant those grapes there, or should we invest? There's all sorts of puzzles,
Those puzzles.
But I would love to see more Texas wine on the menu. I would love to have more control over that, and to have more consistent style. I would love to bring in other countries like Spain, New Zealand, that are bringing or making wine that is truly the best representative of that place, of those coordinates, so that we can express them just kind of in the brightest and best way that we can. So hopefully we'll be bringing in even more wine from other places, but making more wine in Texas, and doing the best to bring the best wine at the best value that we can.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of great places for people in Texas to go get great wine. And Coordinates now here in High, as well as then on the main street, you have those 2 great locations. So what do you think really sets Coordinates Vineyards apart from a lot of other places that people would say, when I go out to try some wine, I've got to go to Coordinates and check it out?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a really important question for the area, particularly with how the industry has changed a lot over the past couple of years. So when we started on Main Street, there were kind of 2 things that I thought differentiated us. One was that we had South African wine, which is the least represented on the U.S. wine market. I feel like the South African wine that we have is exceptional. Like it's really an exceptional wine. And then the other one was that we're open later than most people. So staying open till 9, 10 o'clock at night. Since then, I think there's even more things that make it different, that make coming to Coordinates different, and more important than all of those things. And that is that we really focus on the experience, on the customer experience. So when you come in here, we want you to have an experience that is not only going to be fun and enjoyable, but valuable. Like it really has something that you can take with you. And it'll be useful for you later in your life.
Yeah.
And so that's about the educational piece, the experience piece of it. And so we've really been focusing on that over the past, maybe 6-7 months and working towards creating like the best possible experience that you can when you come in. And it's something that I hear from people more than anything else. So it started with people telling me like, oh, that was the best experience, or being on a tour and saying, I wish we would have come here first because it would have made all the other ones more enjoyable. So I think the difference between what we do and what a lot of our neighbors do is that we really spend a lot of time and work really hard to make sure that that experience and that educational piece is valuable and useful. But yeah, what I think makes the difference when you come to Coordinates is the wine, the place, the people all work together to provide an experience that is, it's more than educational, and it's more than fun. It's valuable. Cool. And I think that right now that's what people are looking for in wine, is that they want the experience more than anything else. So that's the goal, to provide the best experience we can.
And that experience that Austin talks about can become a milepost on your wine journey when you go to visit Coordinates Vineyards. Their wines and their educational experience that you get when you go there will broaden your horizons, and you can now add that as a new coordinates on your wine journey after experiencing that with them. Oh, and I found an interesting little tidbit after the interview. I went and did a little research and found out more about that Dykey family baseball game that Austin talked about in the interview. And they went to Kansas to play this team from Illinois and this other brother's team. And unfortunately, though they fought valiantly, they did lose that game 11-5 there in Kansas. There's actually a great article on the Texas Historical Commission's website that goes into details and talks a little bit about the game and the people in it and so forth. And so you can read that, find that link in the show notes down below. Okay, so be sure to check out their website before you go visit them. It's www.coordinatesvineyards.com. And on their beautiful website, you're going to find things about those wines that they have, the South African wines. Being an importer of those South African wines, it's one of the few places you can actually find a Pinotage outside of a specialty wine shop, and you can order those wines right there on their website. You'll find more information about their name, their events that they have going on at Coordinates, more info about some of those great wines that they have. You can even make a reservation for your visit and even join the wine club there, right there on the website. And as always, don't forget, when you go see them, make sure you tell them you heard about them on this podcast, Texas Under Vine. After we finished the interview, as you saw and heard, I got to taste a few of those wines there as part of the interview process. But when we were done, I got to go into the tasting room and try a few more of those fantastic wines they have there at Coordinates. And of course, the time came for me to pick the one that I wanted for my episode wine library for episode 56 here. And I did a first. So I picked a wine that I've never picked before, a type of wine in the history of this podcast. I picked a sparkling wine. So that Coordinates Sparkling Brut, which was the very first wine that we tried in the interview. This is a Sauvignon Blanc that is sparkling from South Africa. Really, really, really interesting wine. Really tasty. You get those great aromatics that Sauvignon Blanc is known for as in the flavors, but you also get the balance of the creaminess of the bubbles coming through. It was really unlike almost any other sparkling wine that I had tried before. I was so taken by that I decided to make that sparkling wine the first sparkling wine of my episode wine library for the Texas Under Vine podcast. So you got to make sure and try this when you go. It's their Sparkling Brut, all right? And you'll probably get that offered to you as one of the first wines when you go to taste wines there at Coordinates Vineyards. Well, I've got a lot more coordinates on my map for other great wine destinations I still need to go visit. And so it's time for me to move on from this longer episode here of the podcast and go visit some other great places. But before I do, would you consider leaving me a rating and review wherever you get this podcast? It's been a little while since I've got a couple of ratings and reviews, and I would love to see what you think. Plus, it really helps me move that podcast up in the computer algorithms to be seen by even more wine lovers and people who need to discover Texas wine. And while you're at it, share it with a friend. No one likes wine like you do and like your friends do, so share it with them so they can discover the great richness of our Texas wine community and really see that industry grow as we grow together and rise all those ships together. So leave me that rating and review. It only takes a couple of minutes of your time and it's free. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe the podcast, and leave a comment down below telling me what's your favorite thing. If you've been to Coordinates Vineyards, either on Main Street or at their high location, what's your favorite thing about Coordinates? Or if you have not been yet, but now you're getting excited to go, tell me what's the thing you're most looking forward to visiting or seeing when you go there. And with that, my time is up. So don't forget, subscribe to my socials and follow the podcast to be notified anytime a brand new episode is released. And until then, happy trails and bottoms up, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Texas Under Vine. We strive to provide you with the best information about wine businesses all over Texas. Be sure to check out our website at texasundervine.com and follow us on our socials at Texas Under Vine to stay up on all the upcoming episodes. Please email us with any suggestions or feedback. Also, contact us if you're interested in donating, sponsoring, or advertising on the podcast, just to help us cover our expenses and bring even more great info to you in future episodes. Above all, travel safely, and most especially, drink responsibly.
Howdy, Vine Trippers. Before we go, I wanted to direct you to my website, www.texasundervine, because there you're going to find a whole host of things. Besides access to the audio versions and the video versions of the podcast, you can also get those on any podcast provider, and then the video on YouTube. But there you're going to find a couple of things. Did you know that I actually sold some Texas Under Vine merchandise? I only have a handful of items available, about 5 different things, but they are up on my store. So if you go to the website, texasundervine.com, and go to the top, you're going to see a link for the merchandise store, and there you can get your own Texas Under Vine swag to proudly show all of your friends that you support the Texas wine industry, and you can get them started on and hooked on the podcast as well, so they can go visit even more of these great wine destinations. But in addition to the store, I also have a Patreon for my subscribers, people that support this show. I do this all out of a work of love from my heart. I do not make any money on this podcast. I'm actually in the red because I support it all out of my own pocket as a teacher. And it's mainly because I love wine and I love the Texas wine industry. So if you're willing to help me do that and you'd like to see more of these great episodes, hear more from these amazing winemakers, learn more about some fun destinations for you to go and visit on your own, I would appreciate if you would be willing to subscribe to my Patreon. So at the top of my website page, again, you'll find a Become a Patron link. And there you can get all the information about becoming a subscriber to the podcast here as a Patreon subscriber. It only costs a few dollars a month if you're willing to commit that. And there are various levels that you can commit to that each give you behind the scenes benefits that you don't get. And I do have some new things in the pipeline coming down soon. So you want to get on that sooner than later. But right now you can get things like behind the scenes photos at different wineries. You can get things like at one level, you'll get a video walkthrough of the winery. So for every episode, I will post a video walkthrough of me taking you through the winery itself so you can see what it's like before you go. And then at one level, you can even find out before everyone else where I'm headed the next week on the show as it comes out. So you'll know before everyone else. You get a sneak peek. So there's just different levels of benefits, and they all cost a different amount. And as you subscribe, you become the heart of this podcast. You really are what helps me succeed. You are my community and my people. And thank you so much for those that do subscribe. So if you're interested in joining Patreon, check the Become a Patron link at the top of the website. So again, the website is www.texasundervine.com. You can also go to all of my socials. I'm at Texas Under Vine on almost all the social accounts. And check it out and consider sponsoring the podcast and maybe even buying some of that really cool swag on the merchandise store. Happy trails and bottoms up, Vine Trippers.